Chapter 1028. The purple light moved so fast that it hit Wu Qi's body almost instantaneously. A series of thunderclaps rang out. In the blink of an eye, at least 100,000 thunderstorms with the power equivalent to the full-force attack of a peak-level Dao-breaking expert exploded within 3 feet around Wu Qi. All the power exploded on the surface of Wu Qi's body under the effect of the powerful restrictive spell, without any leakage. Such a heavy blow would severely injure even an ordinary Dao-fusing expert, but it was not enough to threaten their lives. But Wu Qi's fleshly body had reached the mastery stage in the last chapter of the heaven-refining grand magic, and his fleshly body was 100 times stronger than it was in his previous life. Although the thunderstorms with the power of a peak-level Dao-breaking expert 100,000 times were terrifying, they only tore a piece of his robe and burned a few of his hairs to ashes. When the purple mist dissipated and the thunderbolts vanished, Wu Qi appeared in front of everyone, naked and emitting a faint purple smoke. His streamlined muscles were pulsing gently, and his whole body was glowing with a warm light like a pearl. It was a very comfortable color, but it gave the illusion that he was indestructible. When everyone saw Wu Qi's body, they suddenly had an instinctive realization: it was a freakish fleshly body that was 1,000,000 times stronger than the Buddhist League's Vajra Dharma body. Wu Qi was in a bad mood after being bombarded by the thunderbolts 100,000 times. If he had not mastered the heaven-refining grand magic, the thunderbolt could have blown his body to pieces. Then, with the list of deification controlled by Daozu to monitor the entire Pangu continent, his soul and true spirit would have nowhere to run. Would he have to be sucked into the list of deification and wait for the celestial court to confer a title on him? That would be a real bastard. Looking coldly at Ji Dai, whose face was deathly pale and whose body was drenched in cold sweat, Wu Qi chuckled and said, surprised. You didn't kill me. Why did you use a talisman from the Dao League when you were ordered to kill me by the human emperor? Is the human emperor a disciple of the Dao League? Ji Dai closed his eyes, then clenched his teeth until they broke. Wu Qi leaped forward, grabbed Ji Dai's chin, and brutally crushed half of his gums with his fingers. He grabbed half of Ji Dai's face with his claw, ripping out the flesh, cheekbone, and sticky green venom from his mouth. A fist-sized hole appeared on Ji Dai's face. He howled in pain, but the venom in his broken teeth didn't flow into his stomach, so he was still alive. Then, he threw the piece of flesh into the distance. The green venom began to corrode it, and in just a blink of an eye, it had turned into a clump of green pus that drifted down to the ground. Only then did Yan Dan and the others cry out in alarm. They suddenly realized what Ji Dai's behavior meant. Emperor Haozuan had ordered Wu Qi to be killed. If Wu Qi hadn't blocked the blow that could severely wound a Dao-fusing expert with his freakishly strong body, Wu Qi would have been killed on the spot. What then? What would the hundreds of millions of soldiers of the East Sea, who were already emanating boundless killing intent, do? They would swarm forward like a pack of enraged wolves and kill every single one of Dayu's officials present. Even if Yan Dan and the others were the reincarnations of 6 saint emperors, and even if they were all half-step Dao-fusing experts, it would be useless. This was the East Sea, and below them was the East Sea City. Once the East Sea City's defenses were activated, countless ferocious soldiers of the East Sea would swarm forward in a frenzy. Even a half-step Dao-fusing expert would be chopped into minced meat. It was just a matter of killing a few more soldiers of the East Sea before they died. Cold sweat trickled down Yan Dan's back. He opened his mouth and was about to yell at the Dayu officials accompanying him. But there wasn't much time left for Yan Dan and the others. He had just opened his mouth and was about to roar when an angry roar came from behind. By the order of the Yan Huang Emperor, we are going to kill the evildoer Yan Dan. How dare you pretend to be the human sovereign Saint Emperor? The roar stunned Wu Qi. It was as if a bolt of lightning had struck Wu Qi's head, leaving him speechless for a long time. Since when did he order people to kill Yan Dan and the others? Wasn't Yan Dan and the others here to take over the territories of the Yan Huang country under the decree of the Huang clan? It was just a matter of how many people and assets they would take over. Wu Qi was preparing to leave with the soldiers of the East Sea who were loyal to him. However, one of the generals standing behind Yan Dan, and judging from the way he attacked, he should be a member of Jing Ke clan. His body transformed into a fist-thick beam of light and shot out like a rainbow, aiming straight at the back of Yan Dan's head. It was the technique of risking one's life and assassinating that Jing Ke had been practicing. Judging from the posture and aura of this person, he had already mastered the essence of this assassination technique. Yan Dan snorted coldly. A thick layer of heaven and earth aura towered up into the sky around him, condensing into a wheel with a diameter of 1,000 feet behind him. With a loud rumble, he pressed his palm against the incoming beam of light. With a slight push of his palm, a loud crack was heard, and the beam of light was shattered. The dagger that the man was wielding, which was at least a top-grade gold immortal treasure, was shattered into pieces. Except for his skull, all the bones in his body were shattered by Yan Dan. With a miserable howl, the man fell heavily onto Yan Dan's chariot. But he twisted his body crazily, opened his mouth and bit at Yan Dan's ankle. His teeth were tinged with a strange, bright green color. Obviously, he had used some strange method to coat his teeth with poison. He was completely risking his life. Even if he had to die, he only wanted to injure Yan Dan, even if it was just a scratch. Yan Dan snorted coldly. He lifted his foot and stomped heavily on the man's head. A loud bang rang out, and the man's head was almost crushed by Yan Dan's foot. Then, Yan Dan snapped, "What nonsense are you talking about, Jing Wuming? Who gave you the order to kill me?" Just as Yan Dan finished off Jing Wuming, Ying Zheng and the other 4 saint emperors in the 5 chariots next to him were attacked by assassins at the same time. The assassins were all the strongest among their closest confidants and guards. Jing Wuming roared, and many of them struck at the same time. Their attacks were extremely ruthless and decisive, aiming at the vital parts of Ying Zheng and the others. Moreover, the weapons they used were supreme-grade gold immortal artifacts that were extremely powerful and dipped in all kinds of strange and evil poisons. Even a saint emperor might not be able to withstand their attacks. But, Ying Zheng and the others were, after all, strong cultivators, and they had been on their guard when Ji Dai tried to assassinate Wu Qi. So, although they were attacked out of the blue by the people around them, they still reacted quickly and fought back in time. Without exception, Ying Zheng and the others had cultivated the body-tempering cultivation technique of the human race to the level of peak-level Dao fusing expert. With just a gentle slap, they had the power to destroy the starry sky. These assassins had never dreamed that Ying Zheng and the others were so strong that they were so easily injured and knocked down. The assassination was not over yet. Just as Yan Dan stepped on Jing Wuming's head, miserable howls came from the Deyu officials who accompanied them. Some of the officials in Deyu were civil officials, and some were military officials. Most of the civil officials cultivated the Daoist path, but there was also a large group of civil officials who focused on studying various strategies to govern the country. They were purely administrative officials, and were not good at any martial arts or spiritual spells. These people were indispensable to Deyu, but they were also extremely fragile. In order to take over the territory of Yanhuang that Wu Qi had been managing for a long time, the 6 saint emperors had brought hundreds of thousands of purely civil officials. The vast East Sea included tens of thousands of provinces, countless counties, countless people, innumerable products, and innumerable treasures. How could they not have enough civil officials to take over such a huge amount of wealth? Suddenly, the guards of these civil officials pulled out their weapons and attacked them viciously. Clad in heavy armor, these guards of Deyu shouted in unison, "By the order of the Emperor of Yanhuang, we will kill you all." Then, they swung their knives at top speed, and heads rolled and blood fell like rain. These civil officials, who had the strength to truss a chicken, did not even have time to howl before they were chopped in half like vegetables. Pangu continent was rich in natural energy, and the humans who grew up here were born with fleshly bodies that were at least 10 times stronger than those in outer heavenly realms. Therefore, although these civil officials had the strength to truss a chicken, that was all. In the face of the guards and generals whose cultivation bases were generally above second Pangu heaven, these civil officials were as fragile as tofu. Dozens of heads rolled with each slash, and before Yan Dan and the others could react, more than 80% of the civil officials they had brought with them were killed. There were also hundreds of thousands of soldiers of Diyu. At this moment, 30% of them raised their bloody knives and shouted, "By the order of Wu Qi, we will kill the impostor of the Saint Emperor of the human race." Then, they began to hack and kill their colleagues. The troops brought by Yan Dan and the others were in chaos. Wu Qi was stunned for a moment, then he smiled and snapped, "All soldiers of the East Sea, fall into formation. Do not move. Those who move will be regarded as collaborating with the enemy, and will be executed along with their families." Unlike Diyu, all the soldiers of the East Sea were die-hard loyalists who had been brainwashed by Wu Qi over the years, and their souls had been secretly controlled by Wu Qi. Therefore, the army of the East Sea was as solid as a piece of iron. When Ji Dai attacked Wu Qi, there were some generals in the East Sea army who were ready to make a move. But, at Wu Qi's order, all the soldiers of the East Sea army steadied their positions. They stationed themselves in all directions and sealed off the ground and the sky, forbidding anyone from moving. Spears, iron shields, crossbows, and all sorts of other sharp weapons stood up like a forest of hemp. The East Sea metropolis was completely sealed off from the outside world. Crossing his arms over his chest, Wu Qi calmly watched the troops brought by Yan Dan and the others fall into chaos. He smiled but did not offer a helping hand. Instead, he sighed and shook his head. He wondered if the mastermind behind this was the Taoist League or the Buddhist League, for they were trying to sow discord. Laughing in a low voice, Wu Qi stamped his foot on Ji Dai, who was struggling uncontrollably. "Stay where you are," he said with a cold grin. "If you dare to move, I'll chop you into pieces." Ji Dai howled and coughed up mouthfuls of blood. Yan Dan's troops were in chaos. The soldiers were fighting fiercely, and no one could tell who was loyal and who was disloyal. All of a sudden, a Buddhist chant was heard, and the hundreds of generals who were wielding their blades suddenly leaped up to 30 feet in height. Their bodies shone with a golden light, and were adorned with jewels and pearls, revealing the golden bodies of the Buddhist League. Yan Dan's face turned pale with anger. Staring at Wu Qi, he said in a deep voice, "Wu Qi, this is the work of the Buddhist League's despicable people." Before his voice could fade away, streams of green and white smoke rose from the heads of hundreds of generals, in which a lotus the size of a human head was hovering. Thunderbolts shot out of their palms and raging fire from their mouths, and all kinds of Taoist magic were cast. Yan Dan shut his mouth. He was so angry that his body was trembling. Who was behind this? Chapter 1029. A golden light screen, hundreds of miles tall and tens of thousands of miles wide, stood between heaven and earth. The soldiers of the East Sea who were willing to leave with Wu Qi dragged their families and slowly walked into the light screen. Those soldiers rode on heavenly dragons or other immortal beasts and flew in the sky, while their close relatives and friends walked on the ground. The stream of people disappeared into the golden light. The sound of hooves, wheels, and dust rose into the sky. The 6 Saint Emperors, including Yan Dan, stood on the East Sea city wall with their entourage, which had shrunk to nearly half its original size, silently watching the army of Wu Qi leave. Less than half a day ago, the entourage of Yan Dan and his companions suddenly broke out in a riot. A large number of generals and soldiers who had cultivated the profound cultivation methods of Buddhism and Taoism rose up and started killing people. In the blink of an eye, hundreds of thousands of people in the entourage of nearly 1 million were killed. Yan Dan and the other 5 Saint Emperors personally suppressed the riot and captured all the rioters with overwhelming power. However, before they could interrogate these people about their origins, they all committed suicide with secret arts, leaving only half of the entourage alive. Now, except for Ji Dai, who was captured alive by Wu Qi, no one else was left alive. Now, Baiqi had brought a group of villains to interrogate Ji Dai, asking him who was the one who set up this damned trap. Without a doubt, this trap had trapped Wu Qi, Yan Dan, and the other Saint Emperors. Although it did not work out, there must be some discomfort between the two sides, which was exactly what the mastermind wanted. This discomfort had also led to the East Sea army loyal to Wu Qi to let him take all of them away. Yan Dan and the other saint emperors could not bear to have an army that was completely out of their control. What had just happened proved how annoying it was to have an armed force whose loyalty was questionable. In just a few breaths of time, the riot had caused great losses. Would it happen again? Standing on the hologram, Wu Qi smiled and waved at Yan Dan and the others. The golden light curtain was the gateway to his small world. The huge East Sea Legion would be useful in the future. Who knew when it would be a surprise troop? A trace of Renhuang Qi was slowly being generated in his body. The Yan Huang Kingdom in the East Sea had indeed been handed over to Yan Dan and the others, but the Yan Huang Kingdom in the small world still existed. The Renhuang Qi had all kinds of magical effects. How could Wu Qi turn a blind eye to it? After 3 days and 3 nights, the huge East Sea Legion and their clansmen were all moved into Wu Qi's small world. Wu Qi took a glance at the East Sea city and the East Sea, which had now calmed down. He cupped his hands towards Yan Dan and the others, then turned around and flew away without saying a word. Not long after Wu Qi left, King Yangshan came to the East Sea with a large number of soldiers as reinforcements. When he learned from Yan Dan what had happened a few days ago, he immediately apologized to Yan Dan. After all, Ji Dai was his son, and no matter what Ji Dai had done, he could not avoid being blamed. After Yan Dan's gentle words of comfort, King Yangshan's tone changed, and he asked cautiously, "Your Majesty, is it true that this has nothing to do with the King of East Sea?" Yan Dan's face fell as well. "Are you questioning the Holy Mother?" he snapped. King Yangshan was so frightened that he hurriedly bowed and apologized, but he still did not give up and asked, "But, who is the King of East Sea?" Could it be that he? Ingzhen glanced at King Yangshan, then suddenly snorted coldly. King Yangshan dared not speak again. Compared with Yan Dan, who was kind and gentle, Ingzhen, who was brutal and violent, was the most awe-inspiring of the 6 sacred emperors. In ancient times, the name of Emperor Xuanqiu was associated with blood, slaughter, and war. Of the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors, he was the most feared. After frightening King Yangshan, Ingzhen said slowly, "In any case, the East Sea is back into Yu's hands, and that's the best outcome. Before dealing with the various means of the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League, you can't afford to make any more enemies. King Yangshan, go and question your son yourself, and find out who he is working for. The Buddhist League? The Tao League? If you can't find anything, you don't have to come to us." King Yangshan's face fell. He bowed respectfully to the 6 sacred emperors, then hurried to the prison where Ji Dai was being tortured with a group of his subordinates. Ingzhen glanced at King Yangshan's back, and a grim smile suddenly came over his face. Wu Qi no longer paid any attention to anything happening in the East Sea. He flew alone in the void, and gradually, he turned into a cloud and blended into the boundless thick clouds in the sky. No one could find him anymore. In the chaotic heavenly secrets and Panga continent, Wu Qi had deliberately concealed his aura. Even the many almighty experts of the Tao fusing realm could not find out where Wu Qi had gone. In the thick clouds, Wu Qi first contacted Princess Zhanglu with his divine sense, who was slaughtering fiend gods and collecting virtues in the outer heavenly realm, and told her what had happened these days. After that, he cut off all contact with the outside world and sat cross-legged in the clouds like a clay statue, motionless. During this period, fierce battles broke out not far from Wu Qi, between fiend gods and immortals, and between fiend gods and Dayu's soldiers. But, he paid no attention to these things that had nothing to do with him, and just immersed himself in the depths of his body. In the capital of Great Wu, Wu Qi's 18 blood-draining fiend gods had stealthily transformed into invisible beams of light and come to Wu Qi's side. With a twist of their bodies, they transformed into 18 huge blood beads and hovered in front of Wu Qi. Over the years, Great Wu had fought countless battles, and the 18 blood-draining fiend gods had devoured the blood essence of countless living beings, including human warriors, human oracles, immortals from the Tao League, and arhats and bodhisattvas from the Buddhist League. As the fiend gods from the outer heavenly realms had invaded Pangu continent, these fiend gods had devoured the blood essence of countless foreign fiend gods. As a result, their cultivation bases had broken through to the realm of Tao breaking, and all of them had reached the peak of the second tier. After all, with Wu Qi's true form, the realm of cultivation was not a bottleneck for these fiend gods to break through. As long as they absorbed enough blood essence and energy essence, they could improve their strength almost without limit. But now, Wu Qi wanted them for something else. With the 18 blood beads hovering in front of him, Wu Qi slapped himself on the forehead, and the heaven refining cauldron slowly flew up. The blood beads flew into the cauldron and quickly fused into 2 huge blood balls. Narrowing his eyes, Wu Qi endured the suffocating pain and split 2 prime Yuanling clones from his divine soul, each accounting for about 20% of Wu Qi's Yuanling. This was different from splitting the divine soul, which was only a short-term loss and could be recovered with some time. But Yuanling was the core of the divine soul, the most fundamental and important existence of a living being. Once it was injured, it was almost impossible to recover. If Wu Qi did not have the scroll of stealing as his trump card, he would not have dared to split his prime Yuanling. The 2 prime Yuanling clones were injected into the 2 blood balls. Yuanling true flame blazed and burned the 2 huge blood balls, giving off an intoxicating aroma with a strong smell of blood. Wu Qi was using the heaven-defying power of the heaven-refining cauldron to remove the impurities from the blood balls, leaving only the essence of life in them. After 49 days of refining, the 2 blood beads in the cauldron had turned into 2 strange liquid balls that had shrunk to half their size, emitting a purple mist and a golden gleam. Wu Qi smiled faintly. With a shake of his body, the muscles on both his arms peeled off like clothes, then fused into the 2 balls of liquid. As he waved his arms, the muscles, meridians, and skin quickly regenerated, while the muscles that had fused into the liquid balls melted rapidly. The once clear and transparent liquid balls now had a solid texture. Carefully, he performed a few incantation gestures and injected them into the liquid balls. The 2 liquid balls spun rapidly, and gradually, 2 figures appeared in them. As Wu Qi gave a clear cry, a great amount of Yuanling true flame rushed into the 2 liquid balls, and 2 figures finally took shape amidst a clear thunderclap. One of them was dressed in Taoist attire. He stood over 9 feet tall, with white hair and a ruddy complexion. He was shrouded in clear mist and shrouded in purple mist. His cultivation had reached the peak of Tao-breaking realm. There was a vague starlight swirling in the Taoist's eyes. He cupped his fist and bowed to Wu Qi, then said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist, I'm Reverend Shouzhua, the sect leader of Underhand Sect." Wu Qi laughed and bowed back to the Taoist. You flatter me, you flatter me." The other figure was dressed like a monk. He stood over 12 feet tall and had a sturdy body, vaguely giving off the bearing of a dragon or tiger. His cultivation had also reached the peak of Tao-breaking realm. Purple golden light shone faintly from under his skin. This was a sign that the body-tempering cultivation method of Buddhism had reached its limit. The monk clasped his hands at Wu Qi carelessly. "Fellow Taoist, I am the abbot of the Chan Monastery of Great Naga, Master De Yi. Greetings." Wu Qi rolled his eyes and snorted coldly at the monk. "Monks are putting their palms together in greeting." Master De Yi laughed dryly. He hurriedly put his palms together and said solemnly, "I am De Yi." "Greetings, Master." Wu Qi glanced at Master Shouzhua, then at Master De Yi. He smiled faintly. Good, good, good. Let's go our separate ways. Now that we've gone to the East Sea, the shackles, hee, it's really relaxing. It's so satisfying to move around. We've already gained enough from the East Sea. We must be content. We can't be greedy." Master Shouzhua and Master De Yi agreed and bowed to Wu Qi. As a result, Wu Qi gave Shouzhua the grand pure 1-star fixing tower he refined with the white lotus of great purity and the laws of the star cores of 108,000 million elephants to Master Shouzhua. Then, he gave Master De Yi the pious followers of Buddhism in his minor world, who had already given birth to trillions of believers. It only took Master Shojua 15 minutes to refine the grand pure one-star fixing tower. Laughing aloud, he turned into a stream of light and sped towards the underhand sect's headquarters. Master De also spent another 15 minutes to refine the 3,000 Buddhist kingdoms in the palm, storing the countless believers Wuqi had given to him into the Buddhist kingdoms. Then, he chanted Buddhist scriptures loudly and turned into a gust of fragrant wind, rushing towards the Chan monastery of Great Naga guarded by Beiji. Wuqi had given away 2 clones. He pondered for a moment, then slowly strode into the outer heavenly realm. He sat in the void openly, constantly killing demon gods and accumulating virtues. Apart from himself and a few of his trusted subordinates, no one knew that he had 2 clones, and that he cultivated in 2 branches of Buddhism and Taoism. Chapter 1030. At the edge of the East Sea and Diyu, in the boundless mountains, there was a platform halfway up a nameless green mountain. A small, wooden monastery stood on the platform, surrounded by ancient pines and trees. The place was inconspicuous, but it was an excellent blessed land. The green mountain was surrounded by clear water, and spirit veins gathered at the base of the mountain. A hazy stream of purple mist rose into the sky along the mountain, turning into dense clouds that lingered around it all year round. The monastery was divided into 3 courtyards, each with 3 halls on the left, right, and center. Although it was extremely small, it was still quite impressive. Usually, there was only a young monk who looked like he was in his teens presiding over the monastery. There were also dozens of monks who were mute all year round. There were also more than 10 hot-headed Taoists who were busy with chores. The monastery was just like that. Ever since outer heavenly realms descended upon Pangu, immortal sects from other worlds had all taken over the blessed lands, and the nameless mountain where the monastery was located had caught their attention as well. This green mountain was neither tall nor eye-catching, but it was a rare place for dragons to gather in the surrounding spirit veins. It was a vast mountain range that stretched for billions of miles, and this green mountain was the heart of the mountain range. It was easy to imagine how many people were jealous of it. Over the past few years, several dozen foreign immortals and Buddhist cultivators had shamelessly tried to take over the monastery known as the Chan Monastery of Great Naga. However, no matter how eloquent they were with their tongues, or how they rolled up their sleeves and spoke with their muscles, the abbot of the monastery, Grand Master Beiji, would only unleash an unmovable light of Vajra to protect the Green Mountain. No matter how much they attacked, the monastery remained unshaken. No one could take advantage of it. Grand Master Ba Jie did not have a high cultivation base. Usually, he would only display the strength of a peak-level heaven immortal, close to the level of a gold immortal. He never used any powerful offensive Buddhist techniques, except for the minor immovable Vajra Buddha light, which he had cultivated to the acme of perfection. Once, several mid-tier gold immortals had surrounded the monastery menacingly with their disciples, but they had never been able to break through the thin layer of light. In the end, they could only retreat helplessly. When it came to defensive power and endurance, the various Buddhist lights and divine lights of Buddhist sects were blessed by nature. No one could take advantage of Grand Master Beiji. Something like this happened frequently. As a result, the many immortal sects that had found blessed lands in the nearby mountains changed the name of the monastery to the Turtle Monastery. What they were trying to say was that Grand Master Ba Jie never fought anyone head-on, and only knew how to hide in his monastery. After a few years, the Chan Monastery of Great Naga also made a name for itself among the several hundred immortal sects of various sizes in the mountain range. Gradually, a few solitary Buddhist cultivators actually took up residence in the monastery. Grand Master Beiji did not turn away anyone. As long as you earnestly requested to stay in the monastery according to the rules of Buddhism and swore to never do anything that would threaten the monastery, he would allow you to stay in the monastery as you pleased. By the time the dozen or so side halls of the Chan Monastery of Great Naga were filled with monks who were living in solitary confinement, Master Beiji personally led some people to chop down wood and expand the monastery. In just a few years, the Chan Monastery of Great Naga's courtyard occupied almost half the mountain, and the independent Buddhist cultivators who cultivated under Master Ba Jie numbered several thousand as well. They had actually become a great organization that played an important role in the nameless mountains in the blink of an eye. And, these monks who were living in solitary confinement also discovered that while Master Beiji's cultivation was not particularly high, his mastery over the essence of the Buddhist Dharma had basically reached an unimaginable level. Some people even asserted that Master Beiji's cultivation in the Buddhist scriptures was on par with peak golden immortals. Gradually, the Chan monastery of Great Naga's reputation spread. Only then did the many immortals and Buddhist cultivators who had once laid their hands on the monastery come to a realization. It was no wonder that the bald monk Beiji's cultivation was so weak that he could not even tear through a layer of Buddhist light. So his understanding of the Buddhist principles had already reached such a level. Now that was no wonder. There was a saying in Buddhism that one could achieve enlightenment through enlightenment. As long as you had a deep understanding of the Buddhist principles, anything was possible. The monk Beiji had managed to stand up against golden immortals and bodhisattvas with his cultivation as an arhat, which only demonstrated just how deep his understanding of the Buddhist principles had reached. In the blink of an eye, another few years passed. The number of old monks, adult monks, and young monks in the Chan monastery of Great Naga had reached 20,000. After all, his reputation had spread. Master Beiji had also taken in 7 or 8 in-name disciples with good aptitude and comprehension, especially those with good moral characters. He always mentioned that he had a master who was cultivating in seclusion near the monastery. Without his master's promise, he was afraid to take in disciples for real. All he could do was take in a few in-name disciples to fool around with. Outsiders had no choice but to believe Master Beiji's words. Back then, in order to take over the Chan monastery of Great Naga, people had scanned the entire mountain with the senses of their souls countless times, but they had not discovered any monks cultivating in seclusion. If Master Beiji really did have a master who was cultivating in seclusion, why didn't he beg his master to step forward when he was forced to his doorstep in the past? Let alone everything else, even Beiji himself possessed a cultivation close to that of a bodhisattva, so shouldn't his master be a Buddha? How was that possible? Just how many Buddhas were there on the Great Spirit Vulture Mountain? There were Buddhas who cultivated as independent cultivators, but they were extremely few. Surely there was no way there would be one in this desolate mountain. Outsiders only smiled in disdain at Beiji's words and did not take them seriously. Even bald donkeys knew how to lie. They just treated it as a joke. Time flew, and in the blink of an eye, it was the end of the Ling dynasty. The Shizo dynasty had cooperated with the army of demon gods and swept through the southern and eastern borders of Diyu. This mountainous region located at the border between the East Sea and Diyu, far from the southern borders, was also threatened by the army of demon gods. Currently, the army of demon gods was still busy gathering the immortals and independent cultivators in the Ling dynasty, but they would come here to capture immortals sooner or later. It was impossible to flee to Diyu. That would only be asking for death. There was no way out to the eastern borders either. The army of the Shizo dynasty had already swept through that region. The army of demon gods had followed the army of the Shizo dynasty and swept through the various immortal sects that had originally submitted to the Ling dynasty in the eastern borders. What about the southern borders? The Buddhist cultivators would not face much of a problem. After all, the Shizo dynasty was in control of the southern borders. The Buddhist cultivators would be fine, but the immortals would go crazy. There was no way out to the north, south, east, or west. The outer regions were occupied by the demon gods, and the celestial court was under attack. There were at least 500 Taoist sects in this nameless mountain range. The largest had more than 100,000 disciples, while the smallest had more than 7,000 immortals and cultivators. Together with the mortal families and clansmen of these immortals and cultivators, the population was no less than the size of a 6th-grade province in Diyu. Faced with the awkward situation of the Taoist immortals, the Buddhist cultivators snorted and mocked them. Some of the Buddhist sects began to collude with them, contacting the army of the Shizo dynasty to sweep through the mountains and claim all the blessed lands for themselves. At the same time, they sent people to investigate the surroundings, paying attention to every single action of the immortal sections. They were already prepared. As soon as the army of the Shizo dynasty took action, they would immediately lead the way for the army of the Shizo dynasty and sweep through all the immortal sects here. At this critical moment, the Chan monastery of Great Naga suddenly opened its gates. Monk Beiji sat in the air above the Chan monastery of Great Naga. A strand of white mist erupted from the top of his head, rushing into the air. 3 life-bound relics the size of fists revolved above his head. The 3 lotus platforms supported his life-bound relics. Judging from his aura and the appearance of the lotus platforms and relics, he had actually already attained the status of bodhisattva before anyone knew it. He already possessed strength equivalent to golden immortals of Taoism. The monk Ba Jia called out softly, "Under the orders of my master, the Grand Venerable, I have opened the monastery gates to protect fellow Taoists. Whether it's Buddhism, immortal sects, or demons and demons, all living beings are equal. As long as you remain within the gates of our Chan monastery of Great Naga and possess benevolent hearts, no one will be able to harm your lives." This was repeated 49 times. His voice rang through the entire mountain range. The immortals of the Tao sects were stunned, and the Buddhist cultivators of the Buddhist sects were even more confused. They stared at the monk Ba Jia, who hovered in the air and radiated with endless Buddhist light that illuminated the surroundings. There were even some Buddhist cultivators who secretly cursed Ba Jia for being a damned baldy. He had already attained the status of bodhisattva, so he had to act from the standpoint of a bodhisattva. He should be helping the army of the Shizo dynasty against the immortals of Taoism, so why was he protecting those damned ox noses instead? Of course, the essence of Buddhism was benevolence and equality of all living beings, but that was just a slogan. When faced with great benefits, even the hands of Buddhas would be stained with blood, and bodhisattvas would kill in anger. A slogan was just a slogan. Surely that damned baldy Ba Jia wouldn't take a slogan meant to fool mortals and expand his believers seriously, would he? That would truly be a tragedy for Buddhism. Immediately, a monk whose cultivation had reached the higher stage of the bodhisattva realm, roughly the level of a 3rd-grade bodhisattva, swaggered over to the monk Ba Jia on a gust of fragrant wind. He brought his palms together and bowed to Ba Jia, saying sternly, "Senior brother Ba Jia, you're wrong. The army of the Shizo dynasty has swept through the world and purged the demons. It's a sign that our Buddhism is prospering. Aren't you going against the will of the Buddha by protecting these demons of Taoism?" Ba Jia glanced at the monk coldly and suddenly retorted, "Did the Buddha teach you to kill? Did the Buddha teach you to commit arson? Did the Buddha teach you to watch someone die? Did the Buddha teach you to kick someone when they're down? Did the Buddha teach you to harbor killing intent? Did the Buddha teach you to be greedy, resentful, and angry?" The monk was stunned. His forehead was covered in cold sweat. He was truly at a loss for words. Ba Jia casually shot out a beam of Buddhist light and barked coldly, "How can an ignorant, immoral, and heartless person like you be placed on the same level as me in Buddhism?" The Buddhist light was soundless and seemed gentle, yet it was as heavy as Mount Tai when it landed on the monk. The monk let out a miserable howl as he was sent flying by the gentle beam of Buddhist light. His cultivation of the Buddhist Dharma immediately dropped from the level of a 3rd-grade bodhisattva back to the level of a 3rd-grade arhat. All the immortals and Buddhist cultivators who witnessed everything with their divine senses were shocked. Ba Jia's aura was only at the level of an 18th-grade bodhisattva, yet he was actually able to easily knock a 3rd-grade bodhisattva out of the clouds. Just what level had his cultivation of the Buddhist Dharma reached? The vast mountain range fell silent. Suddenly, a voice that resembled a dragon's cry yet was filled with benevolence rang out from the depths of the Chan monastery of Great Naga. "Our Buddha is benevolent and delivers all living beings from suffering. Those who join my path shall be invulnerable. Whether it's Taoism or Buddhism, demons or demons, whether it's a fetus or an egg, whether it's wet or sinful, whether it's birds or beasts, whether it's flowers or trees, as long as they join my path, I shall protect them even at the cost of my own life. Today, I, the Great Venerable, swear upon the heavens to protect all living beings in the world and attain enlightenment. As long as they recite the Taoist name of the Great Venerable and revere me as their master, they shall receive my protection. Even if they encounter countless tribulations and demons, they shall not be able to harm my disciples. As long as they revere me as their master, they shall experience countless rebirths, and I shall definitely help them transcend the mortal world and free them from the pleasures of life." With the forceful oath, the golden flowers of the cyclic heavens drifted down from the sky with resplendent light. A wondrous fragrance enveloped the surroundings, and a ridiculously powerful power of thought expanded into the surroundings. All living beings that came into contact with the power of thought, whether it was Taoism or Buddhism, demons or ghosts, flowers, insects, or fish, would feel great benevolence and bow down in the direction of the Chan monastery of Great Naga. At the same time, a powerful sense of the soul swept over with a whistle, and a strange voice rose into the air. "What a great oath! Ha, just what ability do you have to swear such a great oath?" Chapter 1031. With a gentle sigh, the Venerable De looked at the sky and chuckled softly. This monk's cultivation has truly come from comprehending the Heart Sutra of the Wisdom Vajra. Senior brother said that this scripture is too shallow, but that's because senior brother's knowledge is too shallow. The wondrous truths of Buddhism are filled with endless mysteries with every single word. Which scripture can be described as shallow? The Venerable De fell silent for a very long time. He sighed softly. What this monk cultivates is only the Heart Sutra of the Wisdom Vajra. Please guide me on the superficial parts, senior brother. The vast mountain range fell silent. Not a single living being dared to make a single sound. Even the earthworms underground and the insects in the bushes froze up in fright, afraid that their movements would alarm the ancient Buddha. His aura sealed up the entire mountain range. His aura ruled over everything, like a natural disaster. His aura made all living beings feel like annihilation was right in front of them. Countless gasps of surprise rang out from the various blessed lands in the mountain range. Most of the immortals of Taoism who had nowhere else to go had already decided to place their entire sect under the protection of the Chan monastery of Great Naga. Instead of relying on such a powerful backer, they had to find their own way out. Were they not out of their minds? A thick, powerful, warm, and radiant voice rang out. "Senior brother, I, De, am pleased to meet you. Our Buddha is merciful and has opened the door to convenience. Join my sect and accept me as your master, so I will protect you." Is there anything wrong with that? The ancient Buddha was rendered speechless by the Venerable De's cryptic words. He stared at the Venerable De blankly and suddenly asked, "What's your current cultivation?" "The enlightened Tao." "The enlightened Tao. This monk is at the 3rd grade of the enlightened Tao, yet you managed to injure me. This cultivation." The Venerable De continued to smile and bring his palms together towards the ancient Buddha. He said softly, "Senior brother, you're getting carried away again. What does the crudeness of the scripture have to do with my cultivation in the Buddhist Dharma? The infinite scriptures of Buddhism can all achieve Buddhahood with the 3,000 great ways. However, if I may be so bold as to ask, did the 7 Buddhas achieve Buddhahood through the 3,000 great ways? Before the Gautama Buddha established the Buddhist lineage, did something like the Prajnavajra Sutra exist? He did not use his physical body, nor did he cast any mystic arts or Buddhist arts. It was just an ordinary roar, but it was more powerful than any immortal arts or Buddhist arts. Heavenly Venerable De squinted his eyes and wore the standard smile of a charlatan. He was calm and unfathomable. Before the immeasurable calamity, I was just a cowherd boy. I accidentally heard a monk, Yun Shui, reciting the Prajnavajra Heart Sutra. Thus, my spiritual wisdom was awakened and I understood the immeasurable heavenly secret. From then on, this poor monk used the Prajnavajra Heart Sutra to comprehend on my own. In that tranquility, I comprehended the supreme wondrous principles of Buddhism. Without reincarnation, I achieved the Tao fruit I have today. A low and deep whistling sound came out from the chest of the ancient Buddha, and suddenly, a furious roar that seemed to be able to split the heavens and the earth came out from his mouth. The great roar turned into a tiger-shaped blast that slammed into Heavenly Venerable De's chest. Visible white shockwaves swept across the surrounding mountains, turning several dozen mountains into ashes in the roar. Apart from the Green Mountain where the Chan monastery of Great Naga stood, the land within 1,000 miles was razed to the ground. The ancient Buddha's roar was actually so mighty. Once again, Heavenly Venerable De revealed the smile of a charlatan. He chided, "Senior brother, you're being too naive again. What enlightening the Tao? What breaking the Tao? Why do you have to forcibly divide those realms? A flower, a leaf, a world, a grain of sand, a dust, a Buddha. The world in the palm, and all the secrets are in the heart. The Buddhist League is vast and boundless, so how can the divisions of enlightening the Tao and breaking the Tao describe all the secrets of the Buddhist League?" Raising his right hand, Heavenly Venerable De said softly, "I've used this power to strike you, senior brother." The ancient Buddha grinned coldly. "That's just a way to fool your believers. The Buddhist League respects strength. As long as you're absolutely strong, there's nothing in the world that you can't do. Now that the Buddhist League is flourishing, it's time for us to wipe out all the descendants of the Tao League on Pangu continent. If you dare to try to stop a chariot with your arms outstretched, you'll definitely be smashed to pieces, never to be reincarnated." Heavenly Venerable De smiled faintly. He reached out his right hand and grabbed at the tiger-shaped blast. A white lotus bloomed in his palm, and a deep chanting of Buddhist scripture rang out slowly. The tiger-shaped blast rushed into the white lotus that was several feet wide, and then vanished. It was such a magnificent strike, but it ended in such a low-key manner. The strange feeling made those who witnessed it feel so uncomfortable that they almost vomited blood. Heavenly Venerable De laughed. "The vow has been made. Don't tell me you want me to take it back, senior brother." Ancient Buddhas were the strongest existences of the Buddhist League, the tools of slaughter in the true sense of the word. Heavenly Venerable De flicked his sleeve elegantly and cried out loudly, "Today, the Chan Monastery of Great Naga opens its gates to protect all living beings. Those who are devout are welcome to join us." Heavenly Venerable De smiled gently and pressed his palm down on the ancient Buddha's left shoulder slowly. With a crack, the palm force equivalent to the full-powered strike of an 18th-grade golden immortal penetrated the ancient Buddha's shoulder, turning into a subtle force of tremors that directly attacked the ancient Buddha's essence. His shoulder snapped like it had been cut by a blade, and a heavy arm fell to the ground, producing a heavy rumble of metal. An extremely thin streak of light shot out from the ground in the front courtyard of the Chan Monastery of Great Naga. A white lotus slowly flew up from the light, and Heavenly Venerable De stood on the white lotus, drifting towards the ancient Buddha with a smile. Standing over 3 meters tall and with a sturdy build, Heavenly Venerable De gave off the feeling of a mountain, or an ocean. He was filled with a sense of vitality and unfathomable power. Compared to the scorching and ominous aura of the ancient Buddha, the great supremacy was an elder that people were willing to get close to, while this ancient Buddha was a ball of fire that could incinerate all things, causing people to avoid it like the plague. Facing such a terrifying strike, Heavenly Venerable De's avatar should have staggered back several dozen meters before coughing up golden blood. How was it able to annihilate the tiger so easily? It was just like how the ancient Buddha had not unleashed a startling strike that could destroy the mountains within several tens of thousands of kilometers. It was merely an insignificant gust of wind. Heavenly Venerable De kicked towards the ancient Buddha's lower abdomen. The ancient Buddha, who was currently spitting saliva, never expected the smiling and amiable Heavenly Venerable De to attack him with a smile. The kick landed squarely on his lower abdomen and generated a thunderous boom that sounded like the ringing of a bronze bell. The ragged clothes worn by the ancient Buddha were torn into shreds, and a nearly 2 feet long footprint was deeply imprinted on his lower abdomen. The footprint was 2 inches deep, and it was so clear that it seemed to have been carved by a blade. Heavenly Venerable De raised his eyes and gazed at the sky. He brought his palms together and sighed softly. "Senior brother, powers and abilities are only the tip of the iceberg. The profound truths of the Buddhist Dharma are the foundation. When I look at your avatar, it is like a chef looking at a dish with a knife. It can be easily broken with one strike. What does that have to do with realms and powers? Senior brother, you are mistaken." Heavenly Venerable De looked at the ashen-faced ancient Buddha and smiled. "It is not wrong of you to protect other living beings, but it is a grave mistake to protect the evildoers of the Tao League. The ancient Buddha was stunned. He stared at Heavenly Venerable De as if he was a ghost. Unlike the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the current Buddhist League, who cultivated with the faith of their followers, the faith of the ancient Buddhas came from themselves. They were honorable in the Buddhist League, but they did not have much power. They were a branch of the current Buddhist League. They were ascetics, sacrifices, and used the cruelest methods to refine their souls and flesh, seeking to reach the supreme realm of becoming one with heaven and earth. The ancient Buddha's face was filled with shock as he shouted, "Nonsense! The Heart Sutra of the Diamond is the most basic scripture for beginner Buddhist cultivators to use to suppress their inner demons. How could your Dharma be cultivated with the Heart Sutra of the Diamond?" Standing less than 10 feet away from the ancient Buddha, Heavenly Venerable De smiled and said, "We, the Buddhist League, are compassionate." The 7 patriarchs of the Buddhist League cultivated ancient Buddhist techniques, but they did not reject the blessing of faith. Only Heavenly Venerable De's voice broke the dead silence. Moreover, 99% of the roar's power was condensed into the ferocious tiger. The white shockwave that dispersed into the surroundings was only a small part of the roar's power. The immortals and Buddhist cultivators who witnessed everything with the senses of their soul were all shocked. Was this the power of an ancient Buddha? Faint green skin, green eyes that were as deep as the ocean, shining with metallic light, and a scorching, violent aura surrounded him. The ancient Buddha that stood over 10 feet tall stood at the entrance of the monastery and scolded softly, "Who is bold enough to make such a great wish? Who is bold enough to oppose our Buddhist League? Who is bold enough to protect these wretched Taoists?" A green-skinned figure gradually emerged from the air. It was an ancient Buddha. The golden avatar of Buddhism was extremely powerful, on par with the body-tempering arts of Taoism and the various cultivation methods of the human race. However, 90% of the effects of the golden avatar came from the faith of his followers. Without the countless followers in the Buddhist kingdom in their palms, even the most powerful Buddhist cultivators would lose their tremendous power. The ancient Buddha stared at Heavenly Venerable De coldly and suddenly asked, "Which Buddhist Dharma do you cultivate?" With that, countless streaks of light surged out from various parts of the vast mountain range. Regardless of whether it was Taoism or Buddhism, many cultivators rushed towards the monastery as quickly as they could with bloodshot eyes. If they did not hurry up with such a sturdy backer, then they would truly be stupid. The ancient Buddha bowed towards Heavenly Venerable De before picking up his arm and fleeing as a gust of wind in a rather disheveled manner. In the current chaotic world, survival was the only thing that mattered. Who cared about the conflict between Buddhism and Taoism? The ancient Buddha said coldly, "Then take back your vow. The wretched Taoists will definitely be destroyed. If you dare to protect them, then you'll be opposing Buddhism." Golden light swirled in the center of his palm. The palm force Heavenly Venerable De had used was roughly equivalent to that of an 18th grade golden immortal. The ancient Buddha glanced at Heavenly Venerable De indifferently before nodding with a sneer. The body of an ancient Buddha was the toughest. The palm force of an 18th grade golden immortal was not even enough to tickle him. Only the power of the ancient Buddhas truly belonged to them. Every ounce of their mind, every strand of their muscles, all of their great strength that could subdue dragons and tame tigers, belonged to them. Moreover, because they used ascetic methods to torture their spirit and body, their tolerance for pain was extremely high. There were even some ancient Buddhas who didn't feel any pain. Their spirit and body were incomparably compatible, yet they were separated from each other. The pain of the body would not have any impact on their spirit. Similarly, if their spirit was severely injured, it would not affect their body. The ancient Buddha staggered back several dozen steps. He had firmly absorbed all of the power from Heavenly Venerable De's kick. A trickle of golden blood slowly flowed out from the corner of his lips. His gaze that had already been burning with a hint of passion suddenly became as violent as a volcano erupting. Chapter 1032. Yet, Supremacy De had opened a platform to preach, regardless of whether it was Buddhism, Taoism, or demons. Amitabha Buddha laughed out loud at the cultivators who were flushed with embarrassment. "Today, this poor monk will open the door of convenience for all of you to join my sect. You will enjoy supreme happiness and one day, you will attain Buddhahood. But what did the 7 demon armies mean when they were lying motionless near the Great Dragon Mountains? This Buddha was the current sect master of the joyous sect, Amitabha Buddha. Some knowledgeable immortals and Buddhist cultivators whispered in awe that Supremacy De had the aura of Buddha. Those who heard them immediately spread the word, and in the blink of an eye, the mighty Supremacy De had spread among the cultivators in the Great Dragon Mountains. Everyone was amazed that there was a mighty person here who was close to Buddhas. This was their fortune. A golden lotus could increase one Yuanhui's magic power. Unfortunately, among the cultivators present, many of them had not even cultivated for a full Yuanhui. The magic power contained in the golden lotus was too much for them, and they could not absorb it at all. Among the hundreds of immortal sects in the Great Dragon Mountains, there were only 100 golden immortals. One Yuanhui's dermic power in the golden lotus was too precious for them. One golden lotus was equivalent to one Yuanhui's dermic power. If they could absorb a few more golden lotuses into their bodies, they might be able to improve by 1 or 2 grades. Every lotus condensed one Yuanhui's dermic power. This was a technique that only Buddha could use when he held a Dharma assembly in the Great Spirit Vulture Mountain. Condensing chi to take shape to strengthen the cultivation of his disciples was a technique that only Buddha could use. However, Buddha might not even use it once in 100 Dharma assemblies. The immortals who were cornered by the army of demon gods were looking for a protective umbrella. They needed the mighty power of De supremacy to shield them from the wind and rain. The Buddhist cultivators, on the other hand, heard that De supremacy used the weakest power among the golden immortals to sever the arm of an ancient Buddha. They had never heard of such a terrifying Dharma, so they all rushed to seek refuge under him, hoping to get 1 or 2 words of advice from De supremacy. It would be a great fortune. He burped complacently, then turned to Lao Ai and the others and said, "That's right, this monk Hua has a point. There are 3,000 great Daos in the Buddhist League, and you don't have to sit on a futon. Killing people and eating relic is also the only way to become a Buddha." Supremacy De pointed at the void and countless golden lotuses slowly floated down. He could also tell that not many of the cultivators present could truly withstand the immense power of the golden lotuses. In the end, the golden lotuses floated towards the less than 100 golden immortals. These golden immortals knelt on the ground and kowtowed to Supremacy De to thank him for his great kindness. It was clear that they considered themselves to be his disciples. Before they knew it, the 7 armies of demon gods had arrived at the outskirts of the Great Dragon Mountains. But, when they came close, they stiffened on the ground as if they were having cramps, and were forced to listen to De supremacy's lecture helplessly. The 7 armies all fell to the ground. Countless demon gods surrounded the entire Great Dragon Mountain range in a disorderly manner. There were more than 1 trillion of them. Among the 7 imperial advisors, 3 were ancient Buddhas, while the other 4 were Buddhas who cultivated in other Buddhist leagues' cultivation techniques. Among them was a monk with a face as fair as a virgin and a body as plump as a lotus root. A faint fragrance wafted around him, and one of the disciples following behind him was none other than Lao Ai. It was an extremely majestic sight. Not only did it frighten the demon gods of the other regions, but it also gave the officials and generals of the Shizo dynasty a great fright. Coughing gently, De supremacy began lecturing on the mysteries of the world. He began with the creation of Pangu's world, explaining the various mysteries of Pangu's heavenly ways. His teachings were almost unconstrained, going straight to whatever came to his mind. Occasionally, he would touch upon the comprehension of a certain immortal or Buddhist cultivator with just a few words, making them sit on the ground and enter the deepest state of meditation. De supremacy of the Chan Monastery of Great Dragon Mountains quickly spread out like a rumor. The Buddhist light that enveloped the Great Dragon Mountains suddenly spread out, reducing the 7 armies of demon gods to ashes. This lecture went on for close to half a month. In the depths of the Great Dragon Mountains, the various birds and beasts all remained in their nests, quietly listening to De supremacy's lecture. From time to time, the birds and beasts would let out joyful cries. Their bodies flickered with light. Their intelligence had actually been awakened by De supremacy's teachings. They already possessed the opportunity to shed their skin and cultivate to spirituality. Emperor Wugo immediately ordered a thorough investigation. Very soon, everyone in the Shizo dynasty learnt that an impressive great virtuous monk of Buddhism resided in the Great Dragon Mountains. A few days ago, a certain imperial advisor of the Shizo dynasty had gone to the Great Dragon Mountains, only to return in defeat. However, the imperial advisor's arm had been severed by De-Yi Supremacy's palm strike, which made him very embarrassed. As soon as he returned to Calmheart City, he immediately entered secluded cultivation. He did not mention this to anyone else. Immediately, countless streaks of light rushed into the air. The many cultivators under the Chan Monastery of Great Dragon took up their positions in the air and on the various mountains according to their cultivation, quietly waiting for De-Yi Supremacy's appearance. Killing 6 Buddhas with a single strike, De-Yi Supremacy's left hand turned into a dragon claw and dug out all of their life-bound relics before devouring them cleanly. The minds of countless immortals and Buddhas were shaken. They all bowed towards the Chan Monastery of Great Dragon, calling out respectfully, "Mighty monk, your kindness is unrequited." When the roar rang out, all the cultivators in the entire Great Dragon Mountains, regardless of their cultivation, were overcome with fear. All cultivators, regardless of their sects or schools of thought, placed great importance on the essence of their scriptures. Even for the Tao ancestors and Buddhist ancestor, they were divided into chief disciples, inherited teachings disciples, and outer sect disciples. Not everyone could obtain their legacies. On the 7th day after De-Yi Supremacy chased away the ancient Buddha, golden flowers suddenly fell slowly from the sky. A long howl rushed into the air like a dragon's roar. Master Beiji shook his bald head complacently as he hovered in the air and called out, "Fellow cultivators and senior brothers, you're in luck. Master will be giving a lecture today, imparting his supreme, wondrous teachings. Whether it's Buddhism, Taoism, demons, or demons, feel free to ask questions." With a miserable howl, the Buddha of Immeasurable Joy's life-bound relic was about to fly up, but De-Yi Supremacy opened his mouth and swallowed it. Before the other ancient Buddhas and Buddhas could return to their senses, De-Yi Supremacy roared at them. He drew a shining Buddhist commandment blade from somewhere. Wherever the blade passed, 6 of their bald heads were thrown high into the air by pillars of blood. De-Yi Supremacy sat on a white lotus and gradually rose into the air. He hovered 1.5 kilometers above the Chan Monastery of Great Dragon and nodded with a smile. "What do you mean by great? What do you mean by great kindness? All of you, keep your composure. TSK, focus your minds and listen to this humble monk slowly explain it to you today." By the time countless immortals, Buddhas, demons, and demons had taken their positions, a lingering and elegant fragrance of sandalwood gradually spread into the surroundings. A ring of Buddhist light drifted up from the Chan Monastery of Great Dragon, spreading across the entire Great Dragon Mountains in the blink of an eye and enveloping the entire mountain range. Wherever the Buddhist light and the fragrance of sandalwood passed by, be it immortals, Buddhas, demons, or demons, they all felt their senses clear and their souls recede. Some of their old and hidden injuries immediately recovered, and some of them even increased their cultivation by a tier on the spot. The 7 imperial advisors made their way straight to the front of the Chan Monastery of Great Dragon. De-Yi Supremacy just happened to reach the part where calmness gives birth to composure, composure gives birth to wisdom, and wisdom knows the supreme truths of all things in the world. As soon as he finished speaking, the Buddha of Immeasurable Joy laughed aloud from afar. "Senior brother, you're wrong. If you can understand the supreme truths of the world by calming your mind, doesn't that mean you can become a Buddha just by sitting on a cushion until your ass turns rotten?" That was the truth as well. Now that De-Yi Supremacy had revealed such an ability, if anyone did not hurry up and stick to him, they would truly be worse than an idiot. He clapped his hands hard, producing a series of crisp claps that were extremely charming. As soon as the claps rang out, the faces of all the cultivators in the surroundings immediately flushed and they lost their footing. The Buddha of Immeasurable Joy said sternly, "If you want to become a Buddha, you should start with the art of movement. The mind moves, the will moves, and the body moves. The spirit and the body become one, allowing you to enjoy boundless joy, allowing a wisp of Yuan Ling to plant a golden lotus in that fire. The day the lotus blooms, you'll see me, the Tathagata. That's the true method. With a casual point of his finger, the spiritual chi of the world within several trillion kilometers in space surged and surged, gathering towards the Great Dragon Mountains like a great river. After the endless spiritual chi entered the Great Dragon Mountains, it condensed into fist-sized golden lotus flowers under De-I Supremacy's control. The small and delicate lotus flowers fell from the sky. As soon as they landed on the immortals and Buddhist cultivators, they immediately turned into surging streams of heat, merging into their bodies. Sending by and flying with a kick, De-I Supremacy bellowed, "Piss off. If anyone dares to invade my Great Dragon Mountains again, I'll slaughter my way to your doorstep and kill every single one of you." Without going through countless trials and tribulations and making countless contributions to the sect, no one could truly obtain the legacy of the sect. Whether it be Buddhism or Taoism, there was a saying, the teachings were not to be shared with others. The true teachings were all taught one-on-one in private, so no one could learn anything more than that. If it were not for the fact that the legacies were so difficult to obtain, with the methods and capabilities of the 7 Buddhas and 9 paths of Tao, let alone primordial unity golden immortals, how many of them could even teach Tao-breaking realm zenith immortals? In just a few short days, several hundred immortal sects had all come under the Chan Monastery of Great Dragon. Moreover, over 300 Buddhist sects and several tens of thousands of independent cultivators had joined the Chan Monastery of Great Dragon. With the monastery as the center, the several hundred nearby mountains of various sizes were filled with houses. All of the caves were filled with people. Everyone burned 3 incense sticks piously, worshipping De-I Supremacy as their master. Among the cultivators that filled the sky and the mountains, there were even some who shone with spiritual light from time to time. They had also gained some enlightenment after listening to De-I Supremacy's teachings, and their cultivation levels had improved. The Great Dragon Mountains were enveloped by De-I Supremacy's Buddhist light, preventing the heavenly tribulation chi from taking form. Yet, no heavenly tribulation descended after these immortals and Buddhist cultivators broke through, which made countless cultivators sigh in amazement. Emperor Wugo, who had learned the details, immediately issued an order. The 7 imperial advisors of the Shizo dynasty led their disciples into the Great Dragon Mountains, heading straight for the Chan Monastery of Great Dragon. De-I Supremacy suddenly burst into laughter. His howl was like a dragon's roar from the depths of the valley, shocking the cultivators who had been mesmerized by the delightful Zen art to their senses. Before Amitabha Buddha could do anything else, De-I Supremacy suddenly burst into action. He flew to Amitabha Buddha's side and crushed his head with a punch. The 7 armies of demon gods were heading to the East Sea to cooperate with the Shizo dynasty's army in attacking Yan Huang. They had only come to the Great Dragon Mountains to capture and imprison all the cultivators here along the way. The Shizo dynasty had already come up with an overall strategy. Before they destroyed Diyu, they had to eliminate Yan Huang and Great Wu, the 2 small forces that were in their way. Only then would they engage in a battle to the death with Diyu. Great Dragon Mountains was originally that nameless mountain range. Due to the existence of the Chan Monastery of Great Dragon, the mountain range finally gained a name of its own. Due to De-I Supremacy's fame, countless immortals and Buddhist cultivators had come to join him. Chapter 1033. The Great Dragon Mountain Range's De-I Supremacy's lecture lasted for a month. Then, in front of countless cultivators of the Great Dragon Mountain Range, De-I Supremacy floated up on a white lotus and headed straight for the capital of the Jin dynasty, Kamhart City. It was impolite not to reciprocate, so De-I Supremacy blatantly told the cultivators of the Great Dragon Mountain Range that he was going to Kamhart City to seek revenge. No one can bully my disciples at will. Amitabha Buddha has troubled my disciples with evil magic, which is a disrespect to the Great Dragon Mountain. How can I tolerate such a thing? His words were still echoing in the ears of these cultivators, good for good, and good for evil. The Shizo dynasty should be taught a good lesson for harassing my Great Dragon Mountain. As he floated up on the white lotus, De-I Venerable let out a long sigh that bemoaned the state of the universe and pitied the fate of mankind. The Buddhist sect is unfortunate. The Jin dynasty actually colluded with the foreign fiend celestials to harm living beings. I can only do my best to plead for the lives of the people of Pangu continent. The immortals and Buddhist cultivators of the Great Dragon Mountain Range were moved to tears. Some of them wanted to follow Supremacy De to Calmheart City to settle the score, but Supremacy De was too fast. In a flash, he disappeared without a trace. How could these people catch up to him? In Calmheart City, Emperor Wugo was discussing a great plan with the court officials. The incident in Great Dragon Mountain had severely wounded the fiend gods of the outworld, and the 7 armies were purified by Great E with his Buddhist light. Among them, there were even a dozen Tao-breaking fiend gods, but they were easily turned into nothingness by him. This shocked the entire Jin dynasty. When Tao-fusing stage mighty figures couldn't make a move, Tao-breaking stage great all-embracing golden immortals were the most powerful forces in Pangu world. Who in the Shizo dynasty would dare to fight Great E after he had killed a dozen Tao-breaking fiend gods so easily? Unfortunately, the Great Dragon Mountain Range was in an awkward position. It was located at the intersection between the East Sea and Diyu, as well as the southern and eastern regions. If the Shizo dynasty's army wished to invade the East Sea, they would have to pass through the Great Dragon Mountains. Now that the De Venerable was there, the Shizo dynasty's army would not dare to pass through his doorstep. Where did this grand supremacy come from? Sovereign Wugo tapped his forehead with his Buddhist beads in distress. He's just a secluded itinerant cultivator, yet he managed to cultivate such a world-shaking Buddhist divine ability. What a headache! With the fall of the Ling dynasty, the situation of the Shizo dynasty had never been better. If Emperor Wugo could become the human emperor according to the design of the 7 Buddhist patriarchs, all the humans on Pangu continent would be believers of the Buddhist League. By relying on the boundless power of faith, the 7 Buddhist ancestors would have the opportunity to truly transcend mortality and enter sainthood, achieving unprecedented greatness. Although Emperor Wugo did not know what this so-called transcending mortality and entering sainthood was, he was certain that it was an incredible existence, a supreme existence that was even more incredible than the current Buddha. If he succeeded, Emperor Wugo would naturally benefit immeasurably. At the very least, the 7 Buddhist ancestors would be able to help him reach the realm of Tao fusing and attain the Tao fruit of primordial immortality, right? A primordial supremacy. At the thought of the awkward situation before him and his possible future achievements, Emperor Wugo was caught in a great dilemma despite his profound cultivation of the Buddhist Dharma. The 5 evils of joy, anger, sorrow, and joy burst out at the same time. Faint red flames leaped up from the top of Emperor Wugo's head. He wished that De supremacy was right in front of him, that he could not wait to slap him to death with a palm. My dear subjects, is there no way to deal with the Chan Monastery of Great Naga? Emperor Wugo snapped, do you expect me to ask for reinforcements from Mount Spirit Vulture for a mere wild fox Zen? How preposterous! As the most talented and favored disciple of Amitabha Buddha, Lao Ai had temporarily replaced him as the representative of the joyful sect in the Shizo dynasty after his death. He stood quietly among the many civil and military officials of the Shizo dynasty, narrowing his eyes and sneering. Wild fox Zen. Lao Ai mocked Emperor Wugo in his heart. Which monk who practiced wild fox Zen dared to oppose the Buddhist League? Lao Ai did not believe that there was such a merciful fool in the world. De supremacy must have something he wanted, which was why he was deliberately putting on an act. However, Lao Ai wasn't sure if the Great supremacy wanted to obtain a high position in the Buddhist sect or if he had other motives. Looking at the speechless civil and military officials, Emperor Wugo frowned and gently touched the spot between his brows with his Buddhist beads. Suddenly, he thought of something and said angrily, a few days ago, I ordered you to go to the netherworld to summon Bodhisattva Kitagarbha. Why haven't I seen him yet? Emperor Wugo was the reincarnation of Vairocana Buddha, the Lord Buddha from 100 generations ago, and Bodhisattva Kitagarbha was his first disciple at that time. Logically speaking, when Emperor Wugo had revealed his identity and summoned Kitagarbha, he should have happily led the netherworld branch of the Buddhist League to serve him. But, so much time had passed, and Kitagarbha was nowhere to be seen. Emperor Wugo thought of this matter again today. Taking advantage of the anger brought by De-Yi's supremacy, he brought up the matter again, preparing to teach a lesson to the civil and military officials in the court. Before Emperor Wugo could lose his temper, Calmheart City suddenly shook. A series of cracking noises rang out as all the buildings over 30 feet tall in the city collapsed, and all the trees over 30 feet tall were broken. Dozens of hills in the city were flattened by an invisible force, leaving only about 30 feet of wreckage. Emperor Wugo was horrified. He snapped a few times, then flew up into the sky with all the civil and military officials in the court. De-Yi's supremacy stood on a white lotus, looking down at Calmheart City from above. When he saw Emperor Wugo flying up with his people, he casually pressed his palm down. Emperor Wugo and the tens of thousands of civil and military officials of the Shizo dynasty grunted as they were pushed down from the sky by an invisible force and fell to the ground in a sorry state. Originally, there was nothing in Calmheart City that was taller than 30 feet. But, after De-Yi's palm strike, all the buildings in the city had collapsed, all the trees were crushed, and all the hills were flattened. All the common people and soldiers were lying on the ground, unable to move. Slowly, he landed on the white lotus, which flashed and turned into a stream of clear air that fused into De-Yi's supremacy's body. Honorable De-Yi walked to Emperor Wugo's side, squatted down, and forcefully patted Emperor Wugo's bald head. Since you have become a monk, then you should focus on being a monk. If you want to become an emperor, then you should just grow your hair and become an emperor. Shaving your head and wearing a monk's robe to be an emperor is no different from a prostitute in a brothel crying and screaming that she is still a virgin. Wouldn't that be a waste of effort? Emperor Wugo was so angry that he almost vomited blood. However, De-Yi's magic power was boundless, and not a single living being in Calmheart City could move. He struggled angrily, but it was as if tens of thousands of mountains were pressing down on his body. How could he move? After struggling angrily for a long time, Emperor Wugo hissed, De-Yi's supremacy. Aren't you afraid that Buddha will blame you for attacking my Calmheart City? De-Yi pondered for a moment, then shook his head and said, Buddha? Let's wait until Buddha survives this calamity first. Perhaps in a few more years, even Buddha will be killed, and this poor monk will become the #1 expert of Buddhism. At that time, all of you will have to obediently kneel on the ground and worship this poor monk. Do you think I'll be afraid that he will blame me? A faintly discernible pressure came from the sky, and a cold laugh drifted through the air. How dare you, little monk? Considering how difficult it was for you to cultivate, if you are willing to become my disciple, I will definitely forgive all your sins. De-Yi was slightly taken aback. He looked up at the sky and smiled. Which Buddha is it? The voice said calmly, this old monk, guarding will. How did you cultivate, little monk? Was it really the Vajraprajna Sutra that allowed you to cultivate to this level? De-Yi said solemnly, a monk does not lie. It is indeed the Vajraprajna Sutra that allowed me to cultivate to this level. Buddha guarding will was stunned for a long time, then he suddenly laughed. A monk does not lie, huh? Then what is this great calamity you speak of? The great supremacy sneered. Could it be that even Buddha could not sense that sliver of danger in the dark? Buddha guarding will did not speak for a long time. De-Yi understood that he was probably using his magic to sense the various auras in Panga world. According to Supremacy De-Yi, if there was a heaven and earth tribulation that could threaten a Tao integration expert like the ancestral Buddha, they would definitely sense it. Of course, Buddha guarding will did not take De-Yi's words seriously. What kind of calamity could threaten Tao fusing experts? As long as Panga world was not destroyed, Tao fusing experts would not die. Even if a dozen Tao fusing experts ganged up on one person, they would at most be suppressed. There would be no danger of death. Therefore, Buddha guarding will treated De-Yi's words as empty words. He only used his magic to check the sky out of his instinct to be cautious. As he expected, he could not sense any danger from Panga world. De-Yi, you should become my disciple. Buddha guarding will smiled. What great calamity can threaten me? De-Yi asked in surprise. When I was meditating, I felt a great calamity approaching from beyond the heavens. That's why I came out of seclusion. Can't you feel it? That's why I killed those strange-looking demon gods. They have some connection with the calamity from beyond the heavens. The words beyond the heavens made Buddha Garding speechless for a long time. After a long time, another voice floated over. De, what did you sense from the silence? De took a deep breath. He flipped his palm and a light screen rose up. The light screen rippled like water, and some broken and messy scenes could be vaguely seen. In the scene, a black-robed evil-looking man with long, wriggling black hair piled up behind his body like countless venomous snakes was flying forward with a hideous grin. 1,000 heads, the realm breaker. 7 voices rang out at the same time. Clearly, the 7 Buddhas saw Deyi's image. Deyi Supremacy said indifferently, I don't know this person's name, but I can clearly sense that he has the strength to kill Tao Integration Realm Primordial Chaos Immortals. So he's called 1,000 Heads the World Breaker. No more voices came from the void, and the indistinct pressure disappeared without a trace. Chapter 1034. While the 7 Buddhist patriarchs were frightened into silence by Supremacy Dei's atrocities in Kamheart City, the army of the Shizo dynasty attacking Great Wu was trudging through the mountains. Originally, the Shizo dynasty and Great Wu were connected by a thoroughfare. But after the Shizo dynasty swept away the Ling dynasty, the thoroughfare had turned into countless mountains overnight. No one knew what means some almighty expert had used to move these mountains here overnight to block the road. Above the Shizo dynasty, countless fiend gods were flying noisily with them. Under the control of the leaders of the fiend gods who had joined the Buddhist League, these fiend gods did not attack the Shizo dynasty's army and eat them as rations. But, as they were filthy and uncouth, they could not help but defecate and spit in the sky. There were so many of them that they looked like a dark cloud hovering over the Shizo dynasty's army. Whenever they defecated, their excretions would fill the sky, causing the Shizo dynasty's army to suffer greatly. Some of the fiend gods were strong and tens of thousands of feet tall. Their solid excretions smashed down like hills, while their liquid excretions often caused small flash floods in the valleys. Some of the Shizo dynasty's soldiers were crushed to death by the hills, or pushed far away from the army by the flash floods. All kinds of miserable situations emerged one after another. The Shizo dynasty's soldiers were filled with indignation as they marched on the narrow paths in the mountains. If it were not for the suppression of their generals, they would have rebelled long ago. Originally, the Shizo dynasty also had flying ships that could travel in the sky. But, those domineering fiend gods from the outer domains said that the sky was their exclusive territory, and forbade the soldiers of the Shizo dynasty from flying as equals. Therefore, the Shizo dynasty's army could only travel on the ground. Trekking through the mountains against the sky full of feces and stinking saliva, the resentment in the hearts of the Shizo dynasty's army had turned into a dense dark cloud over their heads, which looked very eye-catching from a distance. On the peak of a distant mountain, Lord Shoujuo was wearing a crane cloak and holding a horsetail whisk. He was smiling as he looked at the Shizo dynasty army that was flooding the mountain ridge like a black tide. He chuckled in a low voice and said, "First, I'll let you suffer a little. Then, I'll let you bleed a little and let some people die. TSK, the world is not something you bald donkeys can monopolize. I've been planning for so long, how can Great Wu let you destroy it so easily?" Supremacy 3 Flame and a group of formidable immortals from Underhand's sect stood in a straight line behind Wu Qi. When they heard Wu Qi's words, they all laughed. The dozens of immortals were shrouded in pure energy, and their eyes shone with an unfathomable divine light. In their eyes, the hundreds of millions of Shizo soldiers were nothing more than clay chickens and pottery dogs. Apart from the leaders of the demon gods, who were difficult to deal with, they could easily destroy the others. However, with Reverend Shoujuo taking care of the Tao-breaking leaders among the fiend gods, it was not difficult for them to deal with the ordinary soldiers of the Shizo dynasty. The army of the Shizo dynasty stretched for thousands of miles, looking mighty and mighty. They moved forward for some distance, and a majestic mountain, tens of thousands of miles high, came into sight. The demon gods flew across the mountainside on chilly winds and evil auras. When the Shizo dynasty army saw the mountain, which stood tens of thousands of miles high and had a base of hundreds of thousands of miles in circumference, they could not help but groan. How long could it take them to walk across such a huge mountain with just 2 legs? Lord Shoujo watched from a distance. When he saw the mountain blocking the way, he could not help but narrow his eyes and smile. This place was originally a plain, and he had worked hard to move the mountain here from the primitive continent in the southernmost part of Pangu continent a few days ago. He had deliberately chosen a mountain that contained a very strong magnetic force, which was comparable to the strongest force that a top-tier gold immortal could exert when using a divine ability similar to innate magnetic force. But, Lord Shoujo deliberately made things difficult for them. He had used a restrictive magic to bind the mountain's magnetic force to its surface instead of releasing it completely. When the army of fiend gods and the Shizo dynasty army approached the mountain, he grinned and pointed a finger at it. The mountain emitted a 5-colored light, and a great magnetic force swept across tens of thousands of miles around. All the soldiers of the Shizo dynasty cried out as they were sucked into the mountain along with their weapons and armors, filling the foot of the mountain. The great magnetic force pulled on their armors, which quickly deformed and crushed their bodies, rendering them unable to move. The lofty demon gods cried out in shock as well. They fell from the sky like bees beaten by a storm. Apart from the hundreds of Tao reasoning and Tao breaking demon gods, the rest were all panting as the mountain sucked them in. They could not move at all. The mighty army of the Shizo dynasty collapsed in an instant. The soldiers cried out in pain, and the fiend gods were struggling and twisting on the mountain. From a distance, half of the mountain was covered with a thick layer of flesh, which made it look extremely bizarre. "Who are you, evildoers?" A fiend god with 4 heads and 8 arms, who looked hideous and ugly, growled furiously. Lord Shoujo waved his horsetail whisk, and a breeze rolled up a thin cloud to cover the crowd. The fiend god's eyes flickered with a gleam as he glanced over, but he could not find Lord Shoujo and the others. Lord Shoujo chuckled and said in a low voice, "These evildoers are real demons and ghosts themselves. Do they think they are righteous experts just because they put on the skin of a bald donkey?" The immortals laughed mockingly, shaking their heads and criticizing the patriarchs of the Buddhist League for their move. The fiend god roared, but when he found that no one answered him, he snorted coldly and shook his body. His body, which was already tens of thousands of feet tall, suddenly grew to a height of 10,000 miles, just as tall as the huge mountain. He waved his 8 thick hands, and the body of the fiend celestial, which was originally pitch black and densely covered with crimson stripes, suddenly emitted a dazzling golden light. Beams of Buddhist light fell from the sky, and the fiend celestial revealed the golden body of Buddhism. His skin turned into a bright golden color, and there were countless lotus patterns on his skin. With 8 arms around the mountain, the fiend god cried out, "Rise!" As the Buddhist light rolled out, the strong geomagnetic force on the mountain was suppressed, and the bedraggled Shizo dynasty soldiers and fiend gods slid down from the mountain. With a great force, the fiend god uprooted the mountain with brute force. The wind and clouds rolled in the surroundings, and when the mountain left the ground, a strong gust of wind blew away countless Shizo dynasty soldiers with low cultivation bases. Reverend Shoujo looked up and saw hundreds of Shizo dynasty soldiers flying over their heads, howling miserably. Reverend Shoujo shook his head and said with a smile, "Fools from outer domains only have brute force. Ha, these fellows with 4 heads and 8 arms. Their ancestor was an acquaintance of mine in my previous life, but he had fallen many years ago, hadn't he? Instead, he left behind so many vile creatures to cause trouble today." Recalling some things that happened in the chaos, and what the Wawang clan had told him, Reverend Shoujo sighed softly and gently waved his horsetail whisk again. Suddenly, the mountain lifted by the fiend god with a great force vanished without a trace, and a despairing geomagnetic force transformed into invisible magnetic flying swords that swept across all directions. This was the result of Reverend Shoujo destroying a huge mountain in an instant, transforming it into geomagnetic force and blasting it in all directions. The fiend god, who had grown to a height of 10,000 miles by using a divine ability, howled miserably as black gold blood sprayed out of countless huge wounds all over his body. The countless invisible magnetic flying swords cut him to pieces, and his huge body collapsed with a boom, turning into a huge pool of blood that filled the valley tens of thousands of miles around. Countless fiend gods and Shizo dynasty soldiers were torn to pieces by the invisible flying swords. Only the fiend gods and the Shizo dynasty generals, who had broken through the realm of Tao reasoning primordial, barely managed to escape from the overwhelming but traceless sword energy, crying and wailing as they fled in the direction of Calmheart City. Although some of them managed to escape death, they were either missing arms or legs, or had their eyes blinded by the sword energy. Nearly 1,000 of them, who had escaped by relying on their formidable strength, staggered all the way out of the mountainous region. Just as they were less than 1,000 miles away, a white cloud rushed out of the valley. Reverend Shojua stood on the cloud, smiling and fiddling with the horsetail whisk in his hand, and stopped in front of the crowd. A black-robed high oracle of the Shizo dynasty pointed a trembling finger at Reverend Shojua and cried out, "Evil Taoist, what do you want?" Reverend Shojua just smiled and nodded. He glanced at the faces of these lucky fellows, then said in a faint voice, "Among you, there are fiend gods from outer domains and ministers of the Shizo dynasty. In short, either these vile creatures from outer domains go back, or the ministers of the Shizo dynasty go back. Kill half of them, leave the other half alive. It's up to you." A beam of spiritual light rushed out from the top of Reverend Shojua's head. The grand pure nature star-fixing pagoda flew up slowly, and the starlight as clear as water shone in all directions. A suffocating and despairing aura was released from the starlight. The high oracle murmured in a low voice, "A supreme treasure of primal chaos." The fiend gods from outer domains and the people of the Shizo dynasty, who were itching to join forces to kill Reverend Shojua, were struck dumb. How could they fight Reverend Shojua when he was protected by a supreme treasure of primal chaos? All of a sudden, the high oracle, who had just spoken, struck 1,000 feet tall fiend god from outer domains behind him with a backhand. A stream of green smoke shaped like a poisonous scorpion went into the fiend god's body, quickly corroding it and turning it into a pool of pus and blood. Before the simple-minded fiend gods from outer domains could react, the civil and military officials of the Shizo dynasty who had come with the army struck out, killing and wounding these fiend gods. Apart from a few of the strongest fiend gods who managed to resist the attack with their formidable cultivation bases, the others were killed almost without being able to fight back. Looking at the dog-eat-dog scene, Reverend Shojua sneered, then transformed into a beam of starlight and flew away at top speed. "Remember, if you dare to invade Great Wu's territory again, you will all die. Great Wu is the territory of the Tao League, and any Buddhist league who dares to take a step here will be turned into ashes immediately." A few fiend gods with formidable cultivation bases roared furiously, then transformed into gusts of wind and sped away. The civil and military officials of the Shizo dynasty were struck dumb. From afar, the mad roars of the fiend gods could be heard, "You have killed our people, and we will never let this go." Reverend Shojua's laughter rang through the void, and only the ministers of the Shizo dynasty wanted to cry, but had no tears. Chapter 1035. Above the 33 heavens, the supreme Daoyu Ocean. In the primordial Tao Palace, a beam of golden light shone down with countless clouds flashing past. The first to bear the brunt was the scene of Supremacy de killing 7 Buddhas with a few punches and kicks and annihilating billions of fiend celestials from the foreign domains. When Supremacy de killed Amitabha Buddha with a punch and devoured his natal relic, countless Tao sex experts in the primordial Tao Palace exclaimed in shock. Especially since he was a Buddhist cultivator, it was really shocking that he could deal such a heavy blow to a Buddhist sex Buddha. Then, they watched as Master De barged into Calmheart City alone, single-handedly suppressed all the civil and military officials under Emperor Wugo, and even did something so humiliating to Emperor Wugo. The Taoist immortals in the Great Hall smiled and shook their heads. The long-browed Taoist laughed and said, "The Buddhist sect has produced a freak." How did he cultivate? Did he really cultivate the Prajna Diamond Heart Sutra? At this moment, the heavenly secrets were in chaos. Even Tao integration realm experts could not calculate someone's origin. In particular, Supremacy De had reached the half-step Tao integration level. Even when the heavenly secrets were quiet, the few Daozu might not be able to capture his aura in the vast heavenly secrets. The 9 Daozu were only curious about Supremacy de Yi's origin. If such a powerful person joined the Buddhist sect, it would not be good news for the Taoist sect. After watching for a while, it was the scene of Supremacy de Yi and the Buddhas talking to each other. Hearing Supremacy de Yi mention 1,000 heads, the expressions of the 9 Daozu and Chi-Chi changed. They looked at each other, and the red-browed Taoist said coldly, "This little bald thief's ability to comprehend in silence is not bad. His Buddhist sect is indeed much better than our Taoist sect disciples in terms of self-preservation." The long-browed Taoist waved his hand disapprovingly. "Let's wait and see what methods they have to deal with 1,000 heads. In the end, they will come to us for help." With Qianshou's interference, the Huahuang clan and the 7 Buddhas' plans will be completely destroyed. They are almost the same as us. At that time, we can just start all over again. The 9 Daozu's faces were filled with complacency. With all the tricks they had set up in the human world, even if the Ling dynasty was destroyed and Zhang Tingyun was killed, they still had other tricks up their sleeves. After so many years of operation, how could they have only set up a chess piece like Zhang Tingyun? When they saw De Yi beat Emperor Wugo right in front of countless ministers of the Shizhou dynasty, and looted all the treasures belonging to Emperor Wugo and the few imperial advisors of the Shizhou dynasty, finally, some of the powerful beings in the Palace of Tao Origin could not help but laugh out loud. The laughter immediately turned into a roar of laughter. Even the Daozus were grinning from ear to ear. They were very happy. A Buddhist cultivator robbing Emperor Wugo. It was an interesting sight no matter how they looked at it. This De Yi Venerable is a poor monk. He doesn't even have a single Buddhist artifact on him. The red-browed Taoist squinted his eyes and smiled. The De Yi Venerable, who had been a pauper just a moment ago, was now covered in the glow of jewels. The countless jewels were dazzling enough to blind a person. 7 or 8 strings of extremely powerful prayer beads hung around his neck, and over a dozen strings of glowing Buddhist beads hung around his wrists. Almost 100 powerful Buddhist treasures hung around his body. Stepping on a white lotus, he flew back to the Dragon Mountains complacently. He left behind a few powerful Buddhist treasures for his own use, while the others were all given to Master Beiji and the other monks in the monastery. Chanting filled the air above the monastery. De Yi Venerable began his homework with his people. Wails rang out in Calming Heart City. Emperor Wugo, who had his bones broken and tendons torn, had been stripped clean, leaving only his underwear, threw his head back and roared furiously. Furious, he could not wait to rush into the Dragon Mountains and fight De Yi Venerable to the death. But how could the civil and military officials of the Shizhou dynasty be able to deal with a De Yi Venerable who showed no fear even when facing Buddha? Perhaps, apart from the few prime disciples of Buddha, no one in the Buddhist League could deal with him. The few Daozus chuckled gloatingly. Clouds and smoke flickered rapidly in the golden light, and a huge mountain range was revealed. A fiend god, tens of thousands of miles tall, was clenching his teeth as he pulled the mountain out. Suddenly, the mountain range vanished, and the huge body turned into pure geomagnetic force that condensed into countless invisible geomagnetic flying swords that shot in all directions. In just a flash, countless Shizhou dynasty soldiers and fiend gods who had gone to Great Wu were killed, and their blood flowed like rivers. Except for nearly 1,000 of the strongest civil and military officials and fiend gods, all the others were killed. Smiling, Reverend Shouzhua appeared out of thin air and threatened the civil and military officials of the Shizhou dynasty to kill those foolish fiend gods. Except for the few strongest fiend god leaders, all the other fiend gods were killed. Judging from the oaths they swore when they fled, there would probably be a great grudge between the Shizhou dynasty and the fiend gods of the alien realms. It would not be easy for the Shizhou dynasty to command those fiend gods as if they were their own arms. Reverend Shouzhua shouted unceremoniously that Great Wu was his territory, the territory of the Orthodox Tao League, and that if anyone from the Shizhou dynasty dared to step into it, he would kill them all. The eyes of the few Daozu flickered, and they quickly communicated with each other with their divine sense. It was a pleasant surprise. The power displayed by the Reverend Keeper Zhuo was of the Tao-breaking realm. Although it was rare for itinerant cultivators to break through to the Tao reasoning realm, there would always be such a freakish figure born after several apocalypses. The 9 Daozu had gone through countless apocalypses, and in the long river of time, they had seen countless such geniuses. They thought that Reverend Zhuo was just one of the geniuses born at the right time, and he was not a very amazing existence. Especially when he revealed the supreme treasure of Primordial, the Grand Pure One, the 9 Daozu were even more certain about his origin. It was a great opportunity for a man with great fortune to stumble upon a supreme treasure of Primordial. The supreme treasure of Primordial contained its own supreme power of laws for one to comprehend, and if one could comprehend its profound principles, one could dominate the realm of Tao breaking. With Reverend Zhuo's overall strength, he had completely mastered the supreme treasure of Primordial. In other words, no one below the realm of Tao fusing could defeat him. Such a figure was the real top fighting force at present, and no matter which camp he stood in, the opposing camp would have a great headache. Purple-browed Taoist nodded thoughtfully and said, "This young man should join our Tao League." The long-browed Taoist laughed and said, "You're right, senior brother. He is cultivating the cultivation technique of our Tao League, so of course he should join us. It's just that I'm afraid such an unruly Taoist has not comprehended the free and unfettered state of mind of our Tao League. His killing intent is still too strong." Just now, Reverend Zhuo had turned the army of the Shizo dynasty into ashes. The cruel scene was really shocking. Not to mention the disciples of the Tao League and the Buddhist League, even among the demons and ghosts, there were very few who could kill so many living beings at once. Reverend Zhuo looked indifferent. Clearly, he had no psychological burden about killing. Anyone who provoked him would be dealt the most merciless blow. The red-browed Taoist nodded slowly and said, "That's good. Now is the time of the calamity, and what our Tao League needs is someone with such a murderous nature." Purple-browed Taoist clapped his hands and said, "Promise him enough benefits and make him the chief Taoist supervisor of our Tao League on Pangu continent. Tell him that in the future, he will have the right to supervise all the immortals, and cultivators on Pangu continent. Ask him to go to Pangu continent and rescue those immortals who have been captured. Now, they are being raised by those evil creatures from outer heavenly realms. It's outrageous." The long-browed Taoist frowned and said, "I'm afraid the title of Chief Taoist Supervisor won't be able to convince him. Anyway, we have to give him some real benefits. I still have a square spike that I've collected in the past, but I haven't refined it yet. Why don't I give it to him as a treasure to control fiends? His pagoda looks amazing, but its offensive power is not as good as this chaotic spirit treasure that specializes in killing." The other few Daozu Taoists also offered up their personal belongings, a total of 6 chaotic spirit treasures, countless immortal pills, and various other treasures. The other almighty experts of the Tao League in the Palace of Tao Origin could not help but breathe heavily as they looked at the countless glowing treasures hovering in the middle of the Great Hall. Although they were all men of high moral standing, the treasures in front of them were so many that they could not help but be tempted almost instinctively. After collecting so many treasures, Purple-browed Taoist wrote a decree with a piece of purple satin and handed it to his disciple, Reverend Xianyang. Reverend Xianyang took the decree, rolled up all the treasures with his sleeve, and immediately turned into a beam of light and rushed out of the Palace of Tao Origin. Countless fiend gods tried to stop the Palace of Tao Origin, and the huge fiend god formation had begun to operate. But this time, Purple-browed Taoist had used 36 spirit talismans crafted by Daozu Taoists in a row, forcibly splitting open a broad road in the void and bringing them to Pangu continent in an instant. Inside the Palace of Tao Origin, a golden light flickered again, and the scene of the East Sea City appeared amidst the clouds and smoke. Red-browed Taoist looked puzzledly at the East Sea City, which had changed its flag, and said in a low voice, "It's a good thing that the Emperor of Yan Huang has established his own nation. Why did he suddenly hand over the vast East Sea to Diyu? Are there any mysteries in it? Is there anything we haven't calculated?" The few Daozu Taoists looked at each other and smiled, and even red-browed Taoist shook his head with a smile. Purple-browed Taoist said with a smile, "After all, this matter has something to do with the Huang clan. Perhaps she has given that Wu Qi some benefits, so he has swallowed the East Sea out of thin air. Wu Qi started in the wilderness, and in just a few years, he has built such a foundation. He is indeed a talent. But it's a pity that he is just like an ant, and is being played by the Huang clan. Chuckling, purple-browed Daoist said lightly, this Wu Qi is just a lowly man, and we don't need to worry too much about him. The East Sea has now fallen into the hands of Dao League. Once the situation changes, Dao League will be able to rise again. In short, with the current strength of Pangu world, it is extremely difficult to suppress thousand heads. They will always come to us, and when that time comes. The 9 Daozu Daoists glanced at the list of deification at the same time, and their faces turned a little ugly. If the list of deification, the core treasure of the great plan of deification, had not gone out of control, how could Dao League fall into such an embarrassing situation? However, fortunately, Dao League still had a trump card. Now, as long as thousand heads entered Pangu world and made a scene, things would still be under control. In about 2 or 3 years, with thousand heads cultivation base, he should be able to arrive. Chapter 1036. Reverend Xian Yang paid a visit to Reverend Shou Zhuo without a hitch. The gift of 6 chaotic spirit treasures was simply shocking. If it were not from the private collection of the 9 Daozu, which power in Pangu world could give away 6 chaotic spirit treasures? Even if Reverend Shou Zhuo had an amazing cultivation base, the 6 gifts were too much. Reverend Shou Zhuo accepted the 6 chaotic spirit treasures, countless immortal pills, and other precious treasures, then bowed 3 times in the direction of the Daoyu Ocean. Reverend Xian Yang and Reverend Shou Zhuo had a secret talk for 2 hours, and then he rushed back to the Daoyu Ocean while laughing loudly. Unlike when he came here, he had only used 36 spirit talismans crafted by Daozu himself. But when he went back to the Daoyu Ocean, countless fiend gods were blocking his way, and the entire fiend god formation was activated to fight against Reverend Xian Yang. It took him 144 spirit talismans to barely make it back to the Daoyu Ocean. A month later, Reverend Shou Zhuo, who had spent a great deal of effort to refine all 6 chaotic spirit treasures, left the mountain with 12 primordial immortals from the underhand sect of the Great Wu Orthodoxy. Along the way, Reverend Shou Zhuo gathered the fleeing immortals and itinerant cultivators and put them into his sleeve to protect them. If a small group of fiend gods from an alien domain was touched by Reverend Shou Zhuo, they would end up dead. Reverend Shou Zhuo was a ruthless man with an amazing cultivation base. The 12 primordial immortals led by Supremacy 3 Flame formed a heaven-covering god-slaying formation. Once it was activated, it could cover an area of 10,000 miles and kill anyone who entered it, be it a mortal or an immortal. Once the heaven-covering god-slaying formation was activated, even the 9 Dao ancestors in the primal Dao palace would find it difficult to use the water mirror technique to spy on the movements within the formation. Clearly, the profundity of the formation was beyond imagination. From the outside, once the formation was activated, it would look like thousands of clouds enveloping the entire area, and within the clouds, there would be countless huge figures faintly visible. They would let out loud rumbling sounds, and the sky would be filled with starlight that rained down like rain. After that, the people who were trapped by the formation would be killed. When the 9 Daozu saw the miraculous formation, they couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. Daozu beings were indeed top-grade beings in Pan-Gu world, but they had been studying the great Dao day and night. Therefore, they didn't pay much attention to magic formation, magic pill concocting, tool crafting, and the like. Among the 9 direct disciples of Daozu, some were quite fond of the art of magic formation. Priest Wanji, a direct disciple of Priest Long Eyebrow, was known as the #1 magic formation master in Pan-Gu world. However, Immortal Wanji felt a headache when he saw the heaven-covering god-slaying formation. He had racked his brains but still couldn't see through the mysteries of this formation. It could only be said that esteemed Shou Zhuo's attainments in formations were unpredictable and far beyond Immortal Wanji's. After hearing Reverend Wanji's evaluation, the 9 Daozu had a higher opinion of esteemed Shou Zhuo, and at the same time, they were more assured about his background. Reverend 1G was the #1 magic formation master in Pan-Gu world, and the other Wahwang clan members, the 7 Buddhist patriarchs, and even the 18 saints, were not as good as the 9 Daozu in the art of magic formation. Clearly, esteemed Shouju's attainments in the art of magic formation were not taught by any Dao-fusing expert. Leading the 12 primordial immortals, esteemed Shoujua headed northeast, killing countless fiend gods from outer domains along the way. At last, they came to the farm of immortals built by the fiend gods from outer domains. It was a ring of mountains tens of thousands of miles high, steep like a screen, with countless restrictive spells both inside and outside. Even a primordial immortal would have a hard time escaping if trapped in it. The ring of mountains covered a vast area. More than 80% of the immortals and itinerant cultivators in the Ling dynasty had been captured and sent here. Imagine the celestial court sending tens of millions of outer heavenly realms back to Pangu continent. Each outer heavenly realm governed more or less a number of galaxies. The larger ones governed thousands or tens of thousands of galaxies, while the smaller ones governed dozens, or even hundreds of galaxies. Every star region had tens of thousands of stellar systems, and the smaller ones had hundreds of stellar systems. In every star system, there were tens of thousands of planets with human habitation, and on average, there were immortal sects of all sizes established on every planet. These immortal sects had come to Pangu continent with the outer heavenly realms, and after the rise of the Ling dynasty, almost 70% of them had submitted to the Ling dynasty. Now, 80% of the immortals and itinerant cultivators in these immortal sects had been captured and imprisoned in this farm, so one could imagine how many immortals and cultivators had gathered here. It was a number that made one's scalp go numb at the thought of it. More than 50% of the immortals and itinerant cultivators in the starry sky were gathered here, being raised like livestock. From a great distance, one could see countless dark caves on the mountain range that was tens of thousands of miles high. These caves were the lairs of fiend gods. Some lazy fiend gods were lying in the cave entrances, basking in the sun, while large groups of mortals were busying around them, wiping the long hair or scales of these gigantic fiend gods. There were also some mortals roasting huge fishes and huge beasts, which must be the food of the fiend gods. The status of the fiend gods could also be distinguished by the location of their nests. The fiend gods at the lowest level of the mountain range were still eating raw meat and drinking blood. The fiend gods at the middle level were beginning to pay attention to the mood, and they began to eat the prey roasted by the mortal servants. As for the fiend gods at the upper levels, they had shrunk to the size of an ordinary man, dressed in gorgeous robes provided by the Shizo dynasty, and were sitting upright at long tables, learning how to use chopsticks and taste exquisite food. When Reverend Shouju's divine will swept across the dishes on the tables, he could not help but grimace. Countless immortals were tied to restrictive pillars shrouded in fiend aura, with chains piercing through their collarbones and ribs, making them unable to move, and fiend talismans locking their divine souls in place, preventing them from flying or transforming. Mortal chefs with sharp knives picked the fleshy parts of the immortals, cut them off, washed them, fried them, and cooked them into delicious and luxurious dishes. Some of the fiend gods had special tastes, and they specifically ordered certain parts of the immortals' bodies. The mortal chefs obeyed their orders obediently, either removing the immortals' livers or hearts, or cutting off their genitals to use as raw materials to cook delicacies that were fragrant and appetizing. The immortals struggled and wailed. Some of them had their internal organs removed, some had their eyeballs dug out, some had their muscles cut off, and some had their brains taken away while they were still alive to be cooked. But, these immortals were very strong, so they could not die just yet. They howled and screamed crazily on the restrictive pillars while golden immortal blood kept spraying out of their bodies. Even the golden immortal blood was carefully stored by the chefs in water vats. Every immortal's body was a treasure, and every part of them was an amalgamation of immortal spirit energy. Even their long hair could be processed with a special method and served as a cold dish, which tasted crisper and more refreshing than the best kelp. Even a drop of immortal blood would be wasted on the ground, and any chefs who wasted even a little bit of material would be mercilessly killed. The immortals, who stood high above the masses and took care of the lives of mortals, were slaughtered and cooked like chickens, ducks, cows, and sheep. It was a very miserable scene. The immortals who cultivated themselves from mortals were not so bad, but the demon immortals who cultivated themselves from birds and beasts were even more miserable. They were forced to reveal their true forms. Dragon's liver and phoenix marrow, scarlet lips and humps, even blue swan's wings were roasted, and flood dragon's tendons were used as a cold dish. All kinds of bizarre recipes emerged one after another, and only mortal chefs could come up with so many cruel recipes. These chefs were all from outer heavenly realms, and their study of cooking methods had almost reached the realm of Tao. Usually, they cooked chicken, duck, and fish, but now, they could actually cook immortals. This gave some of the chefs with twisted moods a very strong sense of pleasure. These were immortals who stood high above the masses and could kill thousands of mortals with a single thought. Even if these chefs could not eat them, they were, after all, cooked by them. So, they were extremely happy. Therefore, all kinds of cruel methods emerged one after another, which made these immortals cry and scream, but satisfied the fiend gods. These fiend gods suddenly realized that they used to eat people alive. There was nothing stupider in the world than eating living things. Why would they eat people alive when they could make such exquisite and delicious food? With a long roar, Guru Shoujua's eyes turned blood red, and 2 lines of tears rolled down from the corners of his eyes. How dare you, evildoer! How dare you harm the disciples of the Tao League? All my disciples who have arrived, listen up. This humble Taoist has come to rescue all of you today. All of you, wait patiently and do not panic. His roar had stirred up a hornet's nest. Countless low-level fiend gods swarmed out of the caves, turning into dark clouds that stretched for tens of thousands of miles as they charged toward Guru Shoujua. Guru Shoujua grinned hideously. With a wave of his hand, one of the 6 chaotic spirit treasures given to him by Daozu flew out. It looked like an ordinary copper bell, but it was divided into 4 colors according to north, south, east, and west, emitting 4 strong beams of light that illuminated the void. When Guru Shoujua pointed a finger at the bell, a rumbling sound rang out, and a 4-colored ripple that could be seen with naked eyes smashed forward with a heartrending rumble. Countless fiend gods trembled and suddenly froze in midair. The 4-colored ripple rushed forward, turning everything in its path into nothingness. Amidst the 4-colored ripple, a section of the mountain that stood tens of thousands of miles tall and 100 miles thick crumbled, and countless fiend gods, immortals, and mortals inside the mountain were all crushed to powder. Guru Shoujua brought 12 primordial immortals and rushed into the farm of these fiend gods. He raised one of the 6 chaotic spirit treasures, the blades of water and fire, a strange-shaped sword, and charged forward with a loud roar. Wherever he passed, the blades of water and fire shot out boundless black and red sword beams that swept across heaven and earth, tearing countless fiend gods to pieces before they could figure out what was going on. Ha ha ha! Let me go all out today. Old Taoist, Great Taoist, and Little Taoist, listen up. Follow me, and you will live. Guru Shoujua's voice shook heaven and earth, shattering hundreds of fiend gods who were charging at him. All of a sudden, a dragon cry rang out from afar. Ox noses, I've made a great vow to protect all living beings, and those who believe in me will gain eternal life. Ha ha ha. Demons, I've come to save you. Damn it. Why are there bald donkeys from the Shizo dynasty here? Die now. A Buddhist light towered into the sky as Taoist supremacy charged forward like a mad tiger, carrying a dragon-head spade. From afar, the Buddha and the Taoist glared at each other, then turned and charged toward the endless fiend gods. Chapter 1037. Hundreds of thousands of miles away, Reverend Shoujua and Supremacy exchanged a glance. Their gazes collided in the void, and an invisible psychic shockwave exploded like a tsunami. The void between them shook violently, and countless fiend gods were reduced to dust. The sky was filled with the bloody light of the exploded fiend gods, and in just a blink of an eye, there was nothing left in the void of hundreds of thousands of miles between them. The air emitted scorching waves, and both Reverend Shoujua and Supremacy took a few steps back at the same time. They closed their eyes at the same time, and blood trickled down the corners of their eyes. Reverend Shoujua laughed wildly. Bald donkey, those imprisoned here are the disciples of my Tao League. What are you doing here? Supremacy struggled to open his sore and damaged eyes and shouted, bullshit, bullshit. You stink. Your Tao League is so useless that it can't even protect its own disciples. I've made a great vow to protect all living beings in the world. Anyone with intelligence will call me master, burn 3 incense sticks, and worship me. Naturally, you will be protected by my dharma. What are you doing here, you coward? 2 gigantic fiend celestial leaders roared as they pounced at Supremacy de. Supremacy waved his dragon-head spade casually, beating the 2 fiend gods and sending them scurrying about in all directions. The spade unleashed dozens of blinding golden beams, which condensed into golden divine dragons that flew all over the sky, their claws, fangs, and tails never leaving the 2 fiend gods. The 2 6th-tier Tao-breaking fiend celestial leaders were beaten into a sorry state, howling as they fled into the distance. But before they could get far, Supremacy waved his left hand, unleashing a golden Buddha's palm print that spanned hundreds of miles and struck the backs of the 2 fiend gods. Their miserable howls came to an abrupt end, and the 2 mighty fiend gods vanished without a trace, leaving not even a speck of dust behind. Reverend Shouzhua burst into laughter, then shook his head and said, "How dare you show off before me with such a petty trick?" Throwing the blades of water and fire into the sky, he cried out, "Treasure, spin!" As he cried out, the blades of water and fire, which were no more than 3 feet long, transformed into 2 beams of light, one black and one red, and spun slowly along the trajectory of the Taiji diagram. Suddenly, a large patch of purple clouds condensed in the void, and countless black and red raindrops sprinkled down from the purple clouds. The rain gently sprinkled over the entire farm. Those cultivators and mortals who came into contact with the rain only felt waves of heat flowing into their bodies, giving them strength out of nowhere. But, when the fiend gods touched the raindrops, they were pierced with countless holes. Countless fiend gods hovered stiffly in midair, staring in horror at the huge black and red Taiji diagram in the sky. Their bodies were riddled with holes by the seemingly weak raindrops, and their souls were completely destroyed by the rain. Except for the hundreds of Tao-breaking great fiend gods, all the others were killed by Reverend Shouzhua with just one blow. I am Reverend Shouzhua, the Wanderer of the Universe. I have attained the Supreme Great Tao after going through countless tribulations. Are any of you willing to be my disciple? Hovering in midair, Reverend Shouzhua exercised a divine ability of Dharma idol of heaven and earth to raise his body to a height of about 1,000 miles. His whole body glowed with a dazzling golden light. No matter where he was, more than half of the people on Panga continent could see his avatar. The avatar was imprinted directly into the eyes of those immortals, cultivators, and mortals. No matter where they were or what they were doing, Reverend Shouzhua's avatar appeared in their eyes, and they heard his call. Almost all the immortals and cultivators imprisoned in the barn fell to their knees, worshipping devoutly and calling out Reverend Shouzhua's name. What an amazing ability it was to kill all the fiend gods with a single blow. It was said that the Ling dynasty had the help of a celestial lord from the celestial court, but no celestial lord could have such a heaven-defying divine ability to kill so many fiend gods with a single blow. Perhaps only the legendary saints of the Tao-fusing realm could possess such a divine ability and power. Dei Supremacy's face was unsightly. Grinning coldly, he snapped at Reverend Shouzhua, "You'll be punished by the heaven if you eat all the fiend gods for yourself." Reverend Shouzhua stared coldly at Dei Supremacy and said coolly, "The countless immortals and cultivators here are all members of the Tao League. Even if I eat all the fiend gods for myself and take them all under my wing, it's the Tao League's business. What does it have to do with you, a bald thief?" After pondering for a moment, Reverend Shouzhua shook his head and said, "My dharma has just been completed, and I lack believers to fill the Buddhist kingdom. There are countless immortals here, and I intend to send them into the Buddhist kingdom to enjoy the boundless peace and tranquility." Touching his bald head, Reverend Shouzhua said bluntly, "The power of faith offered by a heaven immortal is greater than that offered by 100,000 mortals, and the power of faith offered by a gold immortal is greater than that offered by 100 million mortals. There are countless heaven immortals and gold immortals here. Give me half, and I'll owe you a favor." Before Reverend Shoujua could say anything, Reverend Shoujua said even more bluntly, I see that you're from the south, and there's only one kingdom in the south called Great Wu. If you help Great Wu fight against the Shizo dynasty, as long as you give me half of the immortals here today, I won't interfere in the war between the Shizo dynasty and Great Wu in the future. If you insist on eating all the fiend gods for yourself, I'll have to add insult to injury. Reverend Shoujua looked at Reverend Shoujua and said with a cold grin, you're a straightforward bald donkey, unlike the other hypocritical people of the Buddhist League. But, if you want to benefit from this place, you'll have to at least let me know what tricks you have up your sleeves. Then, with a wave of his hand, the 12 primordial immortals behind him took out a flag painted with clouds and mist, in which starlight could be vaguely seen. Then, they laid out a heaven-covering god-slaying formation that even the 9 Tao patriarchs could not see through. A huge figure could be vaguely seen in the formation, and a deep, powerful roar could be vaguely heard coming out of it. Reverend Shoujua sneered. Glancing around, he pointed at the fiend gods of the outer domains who had emerged again from the distance and asked, what do you think of these evildoers? Reverend Shoujua pointed at the huge black and red taiji diagram in the sky with great conceit and said, if they dare to come close, I'll make sure they're all dead. Monk, you just have to fight me. You don't have to worry about anything else. De Supremacy pondered for a moment. He pulled off a string of 108 purple prayer beads from his neck and casually tossed them into the air. Instantly, 108 gigantic rings of purple light shot up into the sky like 108 moons hanging in the sky. In the distance, some fiend gods who had heard the news rushed over, but as soon as they got close to the huge farm, they were immediately killed by the Buddhist League's fiends' subduing thunder that sprayed out of the purple lights. The hundreds of fiend gods who had luckily escaped from the shocking attack of the blades of water and fire were frightened out of their wits and fled into the distance. They roared hoarsely and stopped the fiend gods outside from rushing to their deaths. Today was a bad day for these fiend gods. All the powerful fiend gods had been transferred away by the Shizo dynasty to fight against Yu, leaving only a group of servants in the farm. Although there were many of them, they were useless. Both Reverend Shoujua and Reverend Shoujua were half-step into the realm of Tao fusing. Once they went all out to kill the fiend gods, it was like killing ants with a nuclear bomb. When the spell was completed, Reverend Shoujua laughed and transformed into a 36 feet tall golden body, revealing a bizarre golden body with 9 heads, 18 arms, and 4 legs. His body glowed brightly, and each of his 18 arms held a variety of divine weapons of the Buddhist League that he had plundered. Yelling, he rushed into the heaven-covering array of gods of slaying. The clouds emitted by the array of gods of slaying could cover an area of tens of thousands of miles, but as soon as one entered the formation, one would find that it was boundless. In the center of the formation was a colossal ancient mystifying centipede, and a huge Shin pearl hovered above its head, emitting boundless Shin chi to confuse others. The mystifying centipede was the manifestation of Reverend Shouju's nascent divinity, and its cultivation base was astonishing. Even Tao-breaking experts could not see through the Shin chi it emitted, and even the divine sense of Tao-fusing saints could be disturbed by it. Inside the formation, countless huge long-bow men were running back and forth, holding all kinds of flags and streamers as they moved along the paths of the mountains and rivers conjured by the formation. Every time they changed their direction, the various auras in the formation would change hundreds of millions of times. The strange and ever-changing auras were the real reason why even Daozu, a Tao-fusing expert, could not see through the formation. From the outside, it seemed that the formation was only constructed by 12 primordial immortals, so it did not seem very complicated. But in fact, there were 36,000 long-bow men of the Gold Immortal Realm and 1,080,000 Heaven Immortal Realm who were responsible for the operation of the formation. They corresponded to the constellations and the earth veins in the universe, and the variations of the formation were even stronger than the fiend-slaying sword formation. As soon as he strode into the formation, Reverend Shoujua reverted to his original form, throwing his head back and laughing wildly. Immediately, dozens of huge long-bow men donned heavy armors and began to fight each other in the formation with their huge fists, producing deafening booms. Outside the formation, Reverend Shoujua gave a furious bellow, then transformed into a beam of bright light and plunged into the formation. Inside the formation, the dozens of longbow men fighting each other became hundreds, and the deafening bangs of fists and armors rang out for tens of thousands of miles. The monk and the Taoist looked at each other and smiled, a treacherous smile that made one shudder. 3 days and 3 nights later, Reverend Shozhua let out a furious roar as he flew backward out of the formation like a cannonball. There was a shockingly clear fist mark on his chest, 3 inches deep into his flesh. A strong arm shrouded in the divine flame of colored glass slowly shrank back into the clouds. Clearly, it was this arm that had given Reverend Shozhua the final blow. The blow made Reverend Shozhua cough up a mouthful of blood. He fell to the ground in a sorry state, and it took him a while before he staggered to his feet, spun and left without saying a word. Fellow Taoist Shozhua, your cultivation base is really amazing. If it weren't for the fact that we stand on different sides, perhaps we could still have a chance to discuss the Tao. It's a pity, that even with your profound cultivation base, you are still slightly inferior to me. He coughed lightly, then slowly walked out of the heaven-covering formation of God slaying. Countless divine will that were peeping at him from all directions had retracted, and some people had already made up their minds. With a faint smile on his face, Reverend Shozhua clasped his hands behind his back. Looking at the immortals and cultivators who were kneeling across the mountains, he said with a smile, "Are you willing to join my sect?" The immortals and cultivators cried out excitedly and worshipped him with great enthusiasm. With a wave of his hand, Reverend Shozhua cast out hundreds of beams of light, selecting a group of peak-level gold immortals with the most profound cultivation base and taking them as his in-name disciples. His behavior further stimulated these immortals, and they worshipped Reverend Shozhua with even more enthusiasm. Chapter 1038. The troubles on Pangu continent had little to do with Wu Qi. Both Lord Shozhua and Supremacy were more than enough to deal with any troubles. In the void, more and more demon gods were surging out of the spatial door one after another. Wu Qi found that these fiend gods were all out of their minds. They had no fear of death at all. As soon as they smelled the rich aroma of flesh and blood in this world, they rushed over without any regard for their own safety, rubbing their palms and getting ready to feast. As a result, they were all killed by the fiend-slaying sword formation, and no matter how many came, they would all die. An immeasurable amount of virtue poured into the cauldron. The 12,800 magical artifacts he had carefully refined were already covered with a faint layer of yellow energy, and they were beginning to take the shape of artifacts of virtue. About 10 times more virtues than he had already absorbed, and he would be able to turn all these magical artifacts into artifacts of virtue. While calculating the amount of virtues he needed, he casually threw a palm out and smashed 3 eyeball-shaped fiend gods who were roaring and rushing in front of him, turning them into a mass of goo and spraying them away. The dense and viscous liquid filled the sky, turning the countless fiend celestials that were charging over into sieves. It seemed that Prince Changqin had made some adjustments to the outer realms that the mirror of Kunlun communicated with. The fiend gods who walked out of the portal were no longer the same as before, but had turned into other bizarre fiend gods with even stranger appearances. Therefore, the thousands of fiend gods controlled by the Buddhist League could no longer affect these fiend gods who had just entered Pangu world. As the fiend gods controlled by the Buddhist League continued to be killed, the situation would return to its original chaotic state, and both the Tao League and the Buddhist League would be in trouble again. When Wu Qi scanned the void with his divine sense, he found that Prince Changqin had exerted all his strength to activate the mirror of Kunlun. Now, hundreds of portals had appeared all over Pangu world, and countless fiend gods were pouring out of them. And these portals were located in the bases of the Buddhist League and the Tao League, such as outside the 33 heavens and Mount Gridrakada, as well as other important strongholds of the Buddhist League and the Tao League. Because of the thousands of fiend god leaders, the situation of the Buddhist League had turned around a little. But, as Prince Changqin replaced the fiend god races who had entered Pangu world, the Buddhist League's favorable situation was bound to take a sharp turn, and they might even fall into an even uglier situation. At this critical moment, through his spirit power, Wu Qi suddenly discovered 7 light spots rising from the Great Spirit Vulture Mountain. The 7 Buddhas had left the Great Spirit Vulture Mountain together, quickly disappearing into the chaos outside Pangu world. Wu Qi's curiosity was aroused. After pondering for a moment, he quickly gave a few instructions to Princess Zhanglu and the others. Then, he transformed into an inconspicuous starlight and blended into the starry sky, following the 7 Buddhas into the chaos. It took Wu Qi and the 7 Buddhas a few months to enter the chaos. After that, the 7 Buddhas seemed to have a clear goal in mind, and they flew silently through the perilous chaos for more than 8 months, which took them a whole year. Suddenly, a loud rumble burst out of the chaos in the distance, followed by a shrill howl. Wu Qi exercised his primal dharma eyes and looked ahead. Not far ahead, a mass of chaotic energy, about hundreds of feet in circumference, suddenly disintegrated, revealing a yellow-brown world of dust and sand that flashed and disappeared in a flash. A chaotic creature with the shape of a scorpion and the upper body of a beautiful woman rushed out of the world of dust and sand, crying and wailing, covered in green blood. But, when she flew less than 10 miles away, dozens of long, thumb-thick, wriggling hairs shot out of the disintegrating void like vipers and pierced deep into her body. Slowly, 1,000 Heads, the world breaker, walked out of the quickly disintegrating small world and came next to the struggling chaotic creature, whose body was pierced by the long hair. He slowly walked to the creature, reached out his hand, and lifted her chin. He laughed in a deep and weird voice. Puff! 1,000 Heads' right index finger pierced deeply into the spot between her eyebrows. His long hair swallowed and wriggled quickly. Her body quickly withered and decayed, and before long, she was nothing but a thin skin bag. Qian Shou sighed in satisfaction. Then, he slowly turned around and glanced coldly at the 7 patriarchs of the Buddhist sect, who were standing in a line in front of him. A gloomy, cold, and emotionless divine sense surged over. Wu Qi carefully sent out a trace of his divine sense and touched it. Suddenly, a voice rang out in Wu Qi's spiritual ocean. It was an ancient language with a complicated grammar. Every syllable seemed to be able to stir up some kind of natural original power in the chaos. It was filled with a magical power. Wu Qi did not understand this language, but his soul felt familiar with it, as if he should understand it. Because of the direct contact between their divine senses, Wu Qi could clearly understand what 1,000 Heads was saying. Why did you stop me? Are you offering yourselves to me? 1,000 Heads' eyes sparkled with a strange evil light. He chuckled and said, that's a strange way of cultivation. How many small worlds do you have inside your bodies? They overlap, and they are connected by some kind of spiritual power. In them, there are many beings that are between the physical body and the spirit body. What a magical way of cultivation. The head of the Buddhas, guarding Heart Buddha, put his palms together and said, 1,000 Heads, did you forget about us? Back in the day, when you were sealed, we helped you. 1,000 Heads was surprised. He curiously looked at guarding Heart, shook his head, and said, I don't remember. I never wrote down what those pitiful sacrifices looked like. The battle when I was sealed. The one who caused me the greatest harm was Pangu, not you. That's why I don't remember you. You are not even qualified to be my opponent. Why should I remember you? With a contemptuous smile, 1,000 Heads sighed and said, in that battle, I killed anyone who had the strength to hurt me. The fact that you survived proves that you did not hurt me enough, and that you are all weaklings. Pfft, do you think I'll remember a few weaklings? The faces of the Buddhas flushed. They stared at 1,000 Heads for a long time without saying a word. Wu Qi narrowed his eyes. The 7 Buddhas had left Mount Gridrakata abruptly and sneaked into the chaos. Were they here to meet 1,000 Heads? They should know where he was sealed, and they should know the route he had to take to get to Pangu continent from the depths of the chaos. Otherwise, they could not have found him so accurately. Wu Qi even suspected that the 7 Buddhas had left some kind of mark on him. Otherwise, they could not have found him so accurately. The chaotic world was boundless, and compared to it, Pangu world was only a tiny piece of it. The 7 Buddhist patriarchs were omnipotent in Pangu world, but in the chaotic world, they were nothing. Here, their divine abilities were no different from ordinary primordial immortals and divine gold immortals. Carefully, he turned himself into a wisp of insignificant chaotic aura and hid himself in a fist-sized pebble that had grown out of the chaos. Huang Xiaolong released all of his perception, carefully probing the surroundings. At the same time, he prepared the Chaos Origin Sky Veiling Flag. This was a grand mist artifact born in the chaos, and it could display its tyrannical power in this environment. Guarding Heart took a step forward and said lightly, "Since you don't remember us, that's fine. Go back to where you belong. The road ahead is a dead end. If you go, you will die." Looking at Guarding Heart in astonishment, Thousand Heads shook his head and said, "I haven't seen you for many years, but you have grown bolder." Laughing coldly, Buddha Guarding Heart said, "Many years have passed, and you have been sealed for so many years. How much of your strength do you have now?" Qian Shou slightly shook his neck. His long hair, which had piled up behind his head and were wriggling like countless poisonous snakes, slowly stretched out. Countless thumb-thick, tens of miles long hairs slowly spread out, drifting in the chaos airflow. He chuckled and said, "Even though I have been sealed for so many years, the power I have left is enough to destroy that world." Taking a deep breath, Thousand Heads narrowed his eyes and sighed darkly. A world full of vitality and endless possibilities like this should not exist. As for you, I sense some auras from you that should not exist. Together with all the strange existences in the small worlds in your bodies, you can all become my nourishment. After devouring the 7 of you, I should be able to recover 30% of my strength. Wu Qi felt his scalp tingle. What kind of monster was Thousand Heads? Devouring the 7 Buddhas could only recover 30% of his strength? Didn't that mean he had to devour all the Tao-fusing experts in Pangu world to recover all his strength? How could such a monster exist? His existence was beyond common sense. No wonder Pangu ended up in such a miserable state when he gathered tens of thousands of chaos fiend gods to attack Thousand Heads. Guarding Heart put his palms together and a faint green-golden Buddhist light shone out of his body. Staring at Thousand Heads, he growled in a low voice, "If that's the case, I'll fight with you today and see what you can do. But there's one thing I don't understand. May I ask, Thousand Heads, why do you exist?" Thousand Heads gave Guarding Heart a strange look and said with a low laugh, "Why do I exist? Why should I tell you? Ignorant ants, just die in ignorance. I have no obligation to explain anything to you. Back then, that guy named Pangu asked me the same question, but why should I answer you?" The wriggling hair slowly approached the 7 Buddha ancestors. Thousand Heads said coldly, "Are you ready to die? I don't know who released me from the seal, and I don't know who woke me up from that damned eternal sleep. But now that I'm awake and back, it's time for you to die." The 7 Buddhas chanted the name of Buddha at the same time. Their bodies gradually expanded to 49,000 feet tall, and their golden bodies, which were adorned with jewels and pearls, appeared one by one. They were all golden bodies with 1,000 heads and 1,000 arms, and each of their arms was holding a dazzling khanate treasure. The void of primordial chaos trembled as the 7 Buddha ancestors surrounded the 1,000-headed Buddha. Thousands of arms rained down on the 1,000-headed Buddha in a chaotic manner. Thousand Heads gave a strange laugh, and his hair quickly grew longer, turning into countless black arrows that stabbed at the 7 golden bodies. Chapter 1039. In the chaotic void, dozens of blazing streams of fire flew slowly like flood dragons. Drops of purple blood danced across the sky like pearls and relics, and the energy emanating from each of them was comparable to the full power of an ordinary peak-level gold immortal. The nameless streams of fire born in the chaos burned these purple blood beads, and a strong, refreshing aroma slowly spread out. Wherever the aroma went, the chaotic airflow was pushed away, and a spherical vacuum with a diameter of 1,000,000 miles was forced out of the void. Panting slightly, Qiantu looked at the 7 Buddhas in front of him. His body was surrounded by a 7-colored flame that had burned his clothes to ashes, revealing his thin, pale body. Judging from the structure of his bones, Qiantu should have a strong body, but now he looked like a malnourished bean sprout, with shriveled muscles attached to his strong skeleton, giving the illusion that he could be blown away by a gust of wind. Even with such a weak body, the Buddhist flame released by the 7 Buddhist patriarchs burned his body. It only made his skin crackle, and from time to time, a few strange bubbles of color rose from his skin. Apart from that, there was no other effect. The 7 Buddhas stood in the void. Their 49,000 feet tall golden bodies were densely covered with thumb-sized holes, from which drops of purple blood were constantly oozing out and drifting into the distance along with the ripples of invisible magic power. Purple gold light flickered rapidly on the damaged parts of the golden bodies. They were silently cultivating their dhyana skills to repair their golden bodies. However, their golden bodies were injured by the strange long hair of the 1,000 heads. There was a kind of extremely corrosive evil power with a strong devouring power attached to the wounds. It took them a full 10 minutes to heal the wounds. Wu Qi was shocked. With the cultivation base of the Buddhas, any injury could be healed with a thought. For Qiantu to be able to make the 7 Buddhas so strenuously work, his lethality must be terrifying. If even the Buddhas needed 10 minutes to heal the wounds, one could imagine that ordinary immortals, even perfected golden immortals, would probably die if they were stabbed by Qiantu's long hair. A very heavy punch, and very painful. Qian Shou opened his mouth and spat out a blood arrow with a strange color, as if thousands of colors had been mixed together. He stared blankly at the blood he had spat out and frowned. I've just woken up recently and have eaten too many strange things, causing the color of my blood to be so ugly. Originally, my blood was pitch black, a black without any impurities, a black that could destroy and devour everything. Ha! Shoshin snorted coldly. He shook his transcendence golden body, and his 1,000 arms formed a lotus seal at the same time, pressing heavily toward the 1,000 heads tens of thousands of miles away. Inch by inch, the void shattered and emitted a blinding golden light, transforming into a tens of thousands of meters long golden lotus sword, hacking towards 1,000 heads. Within Shoshin's body, the sounds of chanting echoed out. Shoshin had refined 3,000 boundless worlds, and each boundless world contained 3,000 dimensional worlds, and each dimensional world contained 3,000 minor worlds. In these worlds lived the countless believers that Shoshin had accumulated over the years, and they were all fanatics that other bodhisattvas and Buddhas sought but could not get. Countless fanatics were summoned by the Guardian Heart mantra. They chanted the Guardian Heart Salvation mantra in unison, and a huge amount of willpower was added to the Vajra Lotus Sword. The Vajra Lotus Sword, which was already extremely dazzling and condensed from void fragments, emitted a strong light that was millions of times hotter than the sun, and silently chopped down on 1,000 heads' head. Qiantu raised his head and stared at the golden lotus sword with wide eyes. Behind him, his long hair fluttered like countless poisonous pythons and quickly wove into a 100-mile-wide, round shield over his head. With a muffled boom, the golden lotus sword was destroyed, and the shield wriggled rapidly, hissing like a poisonous python that had just eaten its fill. A vast amount of light burst out of Qiantu's body, shooting out countless extremely thin beams of strong light through his pores. Shoshin's 1,000 heads and 1,000 faces sneered together. How dare you swallow the sword power released by me with all my strength? Aren't you afraid of being stuffed to death? Qian Shou's eyes were wide open. His eyes were pale and emotionless, like those of a dead fish as he stared at Guarding Heart. 1,000 long hairs on his head suddenly darted tens of thousands of miles away and accurately pierced into 1,000 heads of Guarding Heart. The thumb-thick long hair penetrated Shoshin's 1,000 heads and penetrated Shoshin's golden body along with large streams of purple blood. 1,000 heads exploded, and the sword power devoured by Qiantu struck into Shoshin's golden body through his long hair. This was equal to Shoshin launching a full-power attack on himself. The upper half of Shoshin's golden body exploded and turned into an ocean of blood, nearly filling up this ball-shaped space. Wu Qi was frightened by what he saw. This was the chaotic void, which was not under the influence of the heavenly Tao of Pangu world. If Shoshin was killed here, was it possible that he would die for real? Wu Qi hadn't fused with Tao himself, so he didn't know what kind of level it was. Therefore, he didn't know what would happen if a fusing with Tao was killed outside Pangu world. While Wu Qi was indulging in flights of fancy, a golden lotus slowly emerged from the purple ocean of blood, holding up half of Guarding Heart's golden body. A 7-layered Buddha statue, inlaid with countless pearls, flew out of Shoshin's golden body. Illuminated by the colorful light, Shoshin's golden body recovered quickly. In a quarter of an hour, Shoshin had fully recovered, but his face was slightly pale. Apparently, the strike launched by Qiantu just now had cost him a great deal of his life force. Qiantu, you're not as strong as me now. You'd better leave. Shoshin vigilantly looked at Qiantu. The look in his eyes was strange, like a man who saw a poisonous snake that was about to be frozen but still wriggling slowly. Although the snake was not a threat to his life, it was a poisonous snake after all. One careless bite could be fatal. Qiantu stared at the seven-layered Buddha statue floating above Shoshin's head and murmured in a low voice, "So annoying." Back then, when the holy world was destroyed, the spiritual projections of those powerful beings were born in this ruin. Not only did they give birth to useless things like you, but they also gave birth to the broken spirits of their weapons. Although their real power is less than 1/1,000,000th of their original power, I'm not the same as I was back then. Licking his nose with his faint black tongue, Qiantu frowned and said, "Back then, when the holy world was destroyed, who gave me a blow from behind? If it weren't for that, I would still have a little bit of my power, and killing you would be as easy as lifting a finger." Shoshin and the other 6 Buddhas vigilantly looked at Qiantu. Judging from their expressions, they were also very curious about what Qiantu had to say. They listened attentively to Qiantu's murmur without interrupting him. Qian Shou squinted his eyes. When he squinted his eyes, his pupils shrank into a thin line, like the pupils of a cold-blooded animal. He stared at the 7-layered Buddha statue above Shoshin's head, shook his head slightly, and murmured, "I still have some impression of this thing. Although the appearance has changed a little, the aura is 90% similar. Its original owner was a very beautiful woman." Smiling strangely, Qiantu sighed and said, "I saw her being tortured to death with my own eyes." "Who did it?" "It's been too long, I've forgotten." "Was it an illusion tribulation?" "I was injured and had to stop all my actions to recover, but he killed that powerful woman right in front of me." A very delicate, very beautiful woman, and her bones were as beautiful as her." "It was an illusion tribulation." "He was a skeleton who liked to collect beautiful women." Qiantu's words made Wuqi shudder. The faces of the 7 Buddhas did not look right. But it was extremely rare to hear any news about the sacred realm from Qianshou, so both Wuqi and the 7 Buddhist patriarchs listened quietly. Thousand Head did not disappoint them. He told them about how he and the other Break World people killed the Holy World's creatures. They destroyed the big and small races of the Holy World. In the end, the entire Holy World collapsed. Thousand Head did not disappoint them. Just a 7-layered Buddha pagoda was enough to make Thousand Head sigh with emotion. Buddha Gardingwu rolled his eyes, and a red cloud rose above his head, inside of which, a uniquely shaped pyramid could be vaguely seen. When Wuqi saw the pyramid, he thought it was Deyu's Sky Tower. When he looked closer, the pyramid had 33 steps. The presence it released was very old. It was not something Deyu's Sky Tower could compare to. Qiantu cautiously took a step back. Looking at the pyramid, he sighed and said, "Such good luck. This is Underworld Tower, the strongest divine item made by Underworld Saint, one of the 7 strongest beings in the Holy World." Qiantu laughed strangely, shook his head, and said, "But what's the point? The Holy World is destroyed. It has become a ruin. You self-righteous almighty beings are just ghosts born from their spiritual projections." Qiantu grinned and looked at Panga World. "I won't give you a chance. Don't ever think about restoring the Holy World. Don't ever think about becoming a powerful being again. You can't kill me, but I can kill you one by one." The pagoda above Shi Buddha's head spun. A Buddha light silently flew out like a ghost. Thousand Head's body shuddered, and a stream of strange-colored blood shot out from his waist. Buddha Shi had taken out a primordial treasure which he had named the Nirvana Pagoda, and had chopped Thousand Head in half at the waist with a single blow. Qiantu lowered his head. Looking at his lower body gradually separating from his upper body, he laughed happily and said, "This is the feeling, this is the smell. Back then, I was hit by Underworld Tower with a full power strike. Amidst the strange laughter, countless black tendrils grew from the two halves of Thousand Heads' body. These tendrils wriggled and pulled his body together again. His wounds healed quickly. Faintly, a Buddha light sparkled on his wounds, but soon, the Buddha light died out. Proudly shaking his body, Qiantu laughed out loud and said, "It's useless. Unless you can destroy my immortal soul seal, you can never kill me. You can only suppress me, seal me, but you can't kill me." With a crazed look in his eyes, Qiantu lowered his voice and continued, "But, where is my immortal soul seal? You can never find it." Speaking of immortal soul seal, Wu Qi's pupils suddenly shrunk. A faint energy was released from Qiantu's body, resonating with something deep in the chaos. Chapter 1040. After cultivating the scroll of stealing, Wu Qi was the first thief under the heaven, and the sensitivity of his divine sense was far greater than that of the 7 Dao fusing experts. As soon as Qianshou mentioned his immortal soul seal, Wu Qi immediately discovered some strange energy ripples emanating from him, as if he was resonating with something in the depths of chaos. It was as if a thief was best at finding treasures. Looking at Qianshou, Wu Qi spread his divine sense out with the first thread of innate thievery energy. As he sensed the energy ripples emanating from Qianshou, an ancient, heavy, and oddly shaped palace suddenly appeared in front of his eyes. The palace floated amidst the boundless chaos. It did not seem to have a corporeal body, but was built with bricks made of vague chaotic energy. The shape of the palace seemed to be changing at any time, but in fact, it had never changed since the beginning of time. The feeling of moving but not moving made Wu Qi feel so uncomfortable that he almost coughed up blood. In the middle of the palace, 13 black coffins were lined up neatly in front of Qi. There was a black lamp in the center of each coffin, and a flame the size of a human head was burning quietly on the wick. Vaguely, a figure could be seen sitting cross-legged in the flame. These coffins, lamps, and the flame gave Wu Qi a strange feeling. It was as if these things had existed since the beginning of time, and would exist forever, as if no power of time could destroy them. Outside the palace in the middle, a heavy and oppressive force enveloped the surroundings. This force was so powerful that it had already condensed into a solid, thick, square wall that wrapped around the palace. 36 huge runes were lined up on the dark wall that looked like it was made of black metal. They did not move at all, but when Wu Qi saw them with his divine sense, he vaguely felt that they seemed to contain all the movements and changes of time. Using his spirit power, Wu Qi memorized the shapes of these spell symbols. Instinctively, he activated his soul power to deduce the changes of the first spell symbol. As a result, his soul power was consumed rapidly. Within the span of 3 breaths, his soul power was nearly drained. A mouthful of blood spurted out from his throat, and his body twitched slightly, nearly revealing his true form. That palace was the place where Thousand Heads stored the so-called immortal soul seal. There was an unimaginable almighty being protecting this palace. Not to mention the magic power that had already materialized, just the 36 runes that were protruding from the wall were millions of times more powerful than the ancient runes that Wu Qi knew of. With Wu Qi's current cultivation, he did not even have the qualifications to comprehend the first rune. Slowly swallowing the blood in his mouth back into his stomach, Wu Qi retracted his spiritual consciousness. Following the resonant aura between Thousand Heads and the immortal soul seal, Wu Qi had found the place where his immortal soul seal was stored. This information was extremely important. Wu Qi narrowed his eyes and smiled. This Thousand Heads was too unscrupulous. When Wu Qi found a way to get his immortal soul seal, he would like to see what else he could do. Judging from this, there were 13 world breakers like Thousand Heads. 13 of them were able to destroy a sacred realm and create this boundless chaotic void. It was indeed incredible. Wu Qi looked at Thousand Heads curiously. What was this weird guy's background? According to what he said just now, Pangu had created Pangu World. Did he have other intentions? Pangu continent was constantly devouring chaotic energy to create new continents. Did Pangu have the intention to rebuild the sacred realm with his own power? If Pangu Gu succeeded, he would become the so-called supreme expert of the sacred realm. That would be a piece of cake. What a great ambition. Wuqi could not help but marvel. Pangu, who was sleeping somewhere in Pangu world, was indeed extraordinary. In the void, the 7 Buddhas raised 1,000 arms and turned them into different incantation gestures. As they chanted in a deep voice, they gathered the power of all the believers in the Buddhist realm in their bodies and turned it into a boundless light that gathered in their palms. The 7 Buddhas stood in a straight line with Guarding Heart as their leader. The Buddhas behind them all pressed their arms on the back of the Buddhas in front of them, injecting all the power they had gathered into the body of the one in front of them. A wheel with 99 layers inside and outside slowly emerged behind Buddha Lord Guarding Heart's head. The wheel spun, with the true forms of billions of living beings between heaven and earth running and playing in it, as well as the true forms of countless holy Buddhas. The heart-guarding Buddha chanted the scriptures in a low voice, merging all the power injected by the 6 Buddhas behind him into his body, gradually compressing and transforming it into a terrifying power that almost blew his golden Buddha body into pieces. Wuqi looked at the 7 Buddhas with a smile on his face. Gathering all the power of 7 Buddhas and releasing it all at once with a Buddhist mystic art, how amazing was this method? Even if 1,000 Heads had the immortal soul seal to ensure that he would not really turn into ashes, could his body withstand such a terrible blow? Wuqi, who had almost taken out his wine and pastries to watch from the sidelines, shook his head. How could ordinary people get to see the full power of the 7 Buddhas? Especially the 6 Buddhist ancestors standing behind the heart-guarding Buddha. After channeling all their energy into the heart-guarding Buddha's body, they sat cross-legged in the void with pale faces. Each of them took out a grand mist treasure artifact to protect themselves. Only Guarding Heart's 1,000 hands rapidly changed into Buddhist incantation gestures, and his chanting became more and more rapid. The 99 layers of wheels behind his head emitted a deep rumble, gradually turning from a shadow of light into a solid object that seemed to be forged from purple gold. 1,000 Heads' long hair fluttered behind him as he looked at Guarding Heart and murmured, "If I hadn't been seriously injured when the sacred world collapsed, this power would be nothing. If I hadn't been severely injured and sealed by Pangu back then, I wouldn't have taken your power seriously. Damn it, if I had met more prey in the past few days and devoured them, I would have had the power to fight you now." With a cold snort, countless strands of hair transformed into black vipers and stabbed toward Guarding Heart. The 7-layered Buddhist banner emitted a blinding light that shone in all directions, filled with scorching power. Before the black hair could get close to Guarding Heart, Buddha Heart's body was set ablaze and turned into ashes in the blink of an eye. Without caring about anything else, 1,000 Heads launched a fierce attack on Guarding Heart with his long hair. Meanwhile, he locked his fingers together and slowly waved them before his body. Thin wisps of black smoke rose from his fingertips and formed a human head-sized, weird spell symbol in front of him. Wuqi coldly looked at the spell symbol. It was one of the 36 spell symbols he found outside the palace. 1,000 Heads cast the spell symbol right in front of him, which gave Wuqi a chance to learn the function of the spell symbol. Clearly, it was quite strenuous for 1,000 Heads to activate the spell symbol. He trembled, and under his white skin, his withered muscles shrunk further. Soon, he was almost a bag of bones. Tremblingly waving his arms, a stream of blood spurted out from between his eyebrows and merged into the spell symbol. At the same time, Guarding Heart gave a deep growl. He reached out an arm and carelessly clawed at 1,000 Heads as he said in a deep voice, "1,000 Heads, no matter who you are, you can't make any trouble in Pangu world now. You'd better stay here and be suppressed." A beam of golden light shot out from the middle of heart-guarding Buddha's palm and shone on Qian Shou's body. The 99 wheels followed the golden light and flew forward, with the core of the wheel wrapped around the golden light. Along with a deep rumbling sound, the wheels spun and approached Qian Shou. This wheel was a magical treasure found by the 7 Buddhas in the chaos. It didn't have any offensive or defensive power, but it had an extremely strong suppressive power. In the past, the 7 Buddhist patriarchs had relied on the power of the treasure wheel to suppress countless chaos-fiend gods who had opposed them, grinding away all their power before completely killing them. Today, the 7 Buddhas joined hands and fully activated the strongest power of the wheel, vowing to suppress 1,000 Heads in the boundless chaos. They couldn't let 1,000 Heads make any trouble in Pangu world. The 7 Buddhas were about to launch all kinds of plans. They were going to fight for the control of Pan-gu world against the 9 Daozu. How could they allow 1,000 heads to ruin their plan? If Pan-gu world was destroyed, the 7 Buddhas themselves would be in danger of dying. All the efforts of their disciples and grand disciples would be wasted. What's worse, the 7 Buddhas weren't Pan-gu. They didn't have the determination to break the void and create a world of their own. The treasure will slowly press down on Qian Shou. Qian Shou raised his head, and his shriveled black lips moved rapidly. Interesting. In fact, you really do have the chance to suppress and seal me again. But, I have something good for self-defense. As 1,000 heads murmured, 9 talismans glowing with purple light floated out of his body. Wu Qi was stunned, and the 7 Buddhas almost cursed out loud. These Dao talismans emitted strong waves of magic power. They were clearly Dao talismans made by the 9 Dao ancestors. Moreover, looking at the purity of the waves of magic power, these Dao talismans were even made with the blood of their lives. The 9 talismans broke, and 9 water tank-sized lotuses appeared around 1,000 heads. Patriarch Guarding Heart snarled, "I knew it was them who let you out. Otherwise, how could you wake up after being sealed by Pan-gu?" The advancing speed of the treasure wheel was gradually slowed down because of the 9 lotuses. The treasure wheel emitted thousands of cold beams of light that clashed with the rapidly spinning lotuses. Petals fell down like rain, but new lotus petals kept growing. Although the treasure wheel had the absolute advantage, it would not be able to destroy the 9 lotuses in a short period of time. Just when the wheel and the lotuses reached a delicate balance, 1,000 heads gently pushed the talisman condensed from black smoke in front of him forward. Mirror. Qian Shou smiled strangely. The talisman expanded and turned into an extremely thin circular curtain of light. With a light flick, the huge wheel, which had gathered all the power of the 7 Buddhas, flew backward with a whistling sound. With a loud boom, the wheel smashed heavily into Guardian Heart. He howled in pain and his body trembled. In an instant, he reverted to his usual Taoist form. A golden will spun rapidly between his brows, and his cultivation base was completely sealed. From a mighty Tao fusing expert, he became an ordinary old man in a Taoist robe. The other 6 Buddhas had just recovered some of their strength. Seeing Guardian Heart being hit by their own wheel, they all screamed as if they had seen a ghost. Daozu grabbed Guardian Heart, and the group transformed into a beam of golden light, breaking through the void and flying toward Pan-gu world. All of 1,000 heads' long hair was torn off. His body trembled, and his bones cracked. Blood gushed out of his 7 orifices. Laughing strangely, 1,000 heads murmured, "I told you, you can't seal me today." Before his voice faded, Wu Qi had already changed his face and appeared behind 1,000 heads like a ghost. 1,000 heads' expression changed instantly. Chapter 1041. Before 1,000 heads could speak, Wu Qi smiled and said, 108,000 pieces are not enough. How about 1,080,000,000 pieces? Or, a little more. For example, I can cut your body into small cells. Believe me, I can do that. I can even separate your cytoplasm from your nucleus. Then, I can seal your pieces and throw them away. Even if you have an immortal soul seal, so what? We are born with the power to devour all energy and all things. When we were born in the holy world, we were very weak. We had to swallow everything to have the power to destroy the world. We killed the 7 strongest people in the holy world together. At the same time, we used all of our power to destroy the holy world. Without hesitation, he took everything out of the 3 rings. Wu Qi used the Yuan Ling True Flame to burn the 3 rings. Perhaps, some strange restrictive spell was attached to the ring with a strange shape, and Wu Qi would not keep it with him to threaten him. He stared at Wu Qi and suddenly shouted, "You do not have the power to find the Hall of the Undying. You are so weak. Even if you find the Hall of the Undying, you cannot break its restrictions. You are a fucking liar." He looked at 1,000 heads and coldly said, "Now, tell me about yourself. World Breaker, what is a world breaker?" Why do you want to destroy the holy world? I am very interested in where you come from. Don't ever think of abandoning this body and forming another body with the Undying Soul Seal. I've already located the location of the Undying Hall. Before you can form a new body, I can definitely destroy your Undying Soul Seal. Upon hearing Wu Qi's words, Qian Shou's body began to tremble. Clenching his jaws, he said, "It's useless. Even if you burn my bones and scatter my ashes, my immortal soul seal can still make me form another body out of thin air. Ha, 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 if worst comes to worst, I'll just abandon my current body." Wu Qi looked at Thousand Heads suspiciously. He coldly smiled and said, "You really don't know where you come from?" Thousand Heads roared and his long hair shot out, stabbing everywhere in the chaotic space. His long hair was hissing, crazily absorbing the chaotic energy in the surroundings, trying to replenish his body. But, Wu Qi laughed strangely again. With a wave of the Xianyuan sword, he cut off Qian Shou's long hair and revealed his bald head. Right in front of Qian Shou, Wu Qi opened the ring with a mystic technique found in Scroll of Stealing that allowed him to open all kinds of storage rings. Then, he scanned it with his divine will and whistled frivolously, "Yo? You have a lot of treasures, huh? How many worlds have you plundered?" "You do have a lot of treasures. But, there doesn't seem to be any treasures of the Undying Realm." Empress Hua had asked him to modify thousands of artifacts of the human race for her. With his character, how could he not take advantage of her? The Xianyuan sword was a sacred artifact of the human race, and when he modified it, he naturally condensed an identical one with primal purple energy. Now, Thousand Heads' face turned completely pale. "How did you find the Hall of Deathless?" he roared hoarsely. "That is a forbidden place that we can't even find ourselves." "Who are you?" Without enough energy to replenish his body, his broken bones could not be repaired, and he temporarily lost the ability to move. "The Hall of Deathless keeps our immortal soul seals. As long as the soul seals are not destroyed, we 13 world breakers are immortal." Before Thousand Heads could think of a way to deal with it, Wu Qi had already cut off his limbs with the Xianyuan sword. Thousand Heads looked at Wu Qi coldly and said, "The Undying Realm is destroyed, and everything is destroyed. How could anything from the Undying Realm be passed down? Undying and indestructible body. Interesting." Wu Qi laughed. "But it seems you can't generate power out of thin air. Otherwise, you would not have been sealed by Pangu. Now, you are badly injured, and you need spirit qi to replenish yourself. There is no spirit qi around you. What can you do?" It was true. Even if Wu Qi went to Hall of Deathless, he would not be able to destroy it. Thousand Heads' brain was a bit muddled. He had only thought of this now. Even though he was a world breaker, Thousand Heads was still a man. He had his own sense of beauty. Wu Qi's face was like a flower, and it was very subversive. Thousand Heads stopped talking. He stared at Wu Qi. After a while, he coldly said, "I am Thousand Heads. I destroyed the Undying Realm with 12 other world breakers. Do not ask questions about where we came from. Even we do not know when or why we appeared in the Undying Realm. When we woke up, we were in Hall of Deathless. Our mission was to destroy the Undying Realm and prevent the Undying Realm from reviving." Wu Qi's slap was very direct and powerful. Now that his fleshly body was very strong, the slap had sent flesh flying out of Qian Du's cheek and nearly smashed his head. Therefore, Qian Du could not make a threatening vow. Wu Qi squinted at Thousand Heads and said, "These pieces of trash cannot be from the Undying Realm, right?" Thousand Heads looked at Wu Qi with anger. He gnashed his teeth and said, "I swear, I will." Wu Qi pulled out the Xianyuan sword. He slashed tens of thousands of times and cut Thousand Heads into pieces of meat. Then, he unleashed a blurry god thunder. He blew Thousand Heads' meat into mincemeat. He did not want to waste his power to seal Thousand Heads and throw him away. He just laughed at the sky and turned around to leave. Thousand Heads' face was twisted. He wanted to cry, but failed to shed any tears. While laughing strangely, he waved the Xianyuan sword and began to hack and slash at Thousand Heads as if he were cutting a melon or a fruit. Sitting in front of Thousand Heads with his legs crossed, Wuqi smilingly looked at Thousand Heads from head to toe, then took off the 3 dark golden, odd-shaped rings on his left forefinger, middle finger, and ring finger. The rings were shaped like venomous pythons, ugly and ferocious, but Wuqi could sense the power of space in them. Thousand Heads narrowed his eyes, stared at Wuqi with his reptilian eyes and said, "Believe it or not, this is the truth. Ever since we woke up, we knew that we had to destroy the undying realm. That's all. But Hall of Deathless is a forbidden place for us too. Every time we were injured severely, we would regrow our bodies in Hall of Deathless, but we could never find out where it is." Thousand Heads roared, glaring at Wuqi and growling, "How dare you insult me?" Just now, in order to fend off the joint attack launched by the 7 Buddhist patriarchs, Thousand Heads had consumed the last bit of his power. While Wuqi hacked at him, the terrifying killing intent on the Xianyuan sword kept accumulating in his body. Even though he had an immortal body, he still howled in pain, and his internal energy was constantly being worn away. However, he had no strength at all at the moment, and could not fight back even if he wanted to. Wuqi stared coldly at Qianshou and said, "Is this what you call an insult? Do you want to try other, more horrible insults?" I. He pretended to be surprised and cried out. Wuqi smiled and said, "You mean the 13 immortal soul seals stored in that palace? Look, I've found your base. If I go there and destroy your immortal soul seals, can you still come back to life?" The Xianyuan sword struck out and cut off Thousand Heads' lower body. New hair grew on Thousand Heads' scalp, but as he had lost too much of his internal energy, the growth of his hair was very slow. Thousand Heads opened his mouth with great difficulty, trying to devour the surrounding chaotic energy, but Wuqi pushed the surrounding chaotic energy away with a great force, turning the place into a spherical vacuum with a diameter of 1,000,000 miles. Then, he turned his hand and shot out a Yuan Ling True Flame. The Yuan Ling True Flame that Wuqi had cultivated from hundreds of innate divine flames was incredibly powerful. Thousand Heads' long hair twisted and struggled in the white flame, letting out shrill howls. After spending the time it took to finish a pot of tea, Qianshou's long hair was refined into a vast, mottled, and bizarre aura. After pondering for a brief moment, he carefully absorbed the aura into his body. Countless pieces of flesh rushed together and slowly reformed into Thousand Heads' head. Thousand Heads sneered and said, "I've destroyed 71 small worlds along the way. If I absorb these things, I can recover a lot of my strength." He snorted coldly, twitched the corner of his mouth, and said, "I've told you everything I know. As for the information about the sacred realm, it's useless to tell you. Someone like you." As he spoke, Thousand Heads' face turned uglier and uglier. After his skillful modification, the killing aura of the Xianyuan sword was 10,000 times stronger than before. With one slash, it could kill almost all the living beings in the world. In terms of lethality alone, it was comparable to a chaotic spirit artifact, or even stronger. Wuqi's swordsmanship was not bad either. With a swing of the sword, Qianshou's limbs were severed at the same time. But, just like Buddha Gardenwell had cut him at the waist, countless tiny black tendrils sprayed out of his severed limbs, and his broken body was repaired once again. Activating the mystic art of Scroll of Stealing, Wuqi slowly absorbed the enormous aura. The primal purple energy in his body began to surge violently, as if some subtle changes were happening to it. Wuqi's eyes grew brighter and brighter. The aura he refined from Thousand Heads' long hair contained some mysterious chaos principles, far more mysterious than the great Tao of Panga world. Wuqi's bold attempt had given him a great advantage, and it seemed that the 36 runes were not incomprehensible. Slowly, Wuqi swung the sword and cut Thousand Heads in half. "You are immortal," he said with a low laugh. "Very well, I'll cut you into 108,000 pieces, then store each piece in a secret sealed pagoda, and randomly throw these pieces around. Tell me, what are your chances of resurrection?" Nodding slowly, Wuqi asked, "Did you rob these things after you woke up?" Wuqi laughed. He put away the Xianyuan sword, walked slowly in front of Qian Du, and winked at him with a smile on his face. However, his current appearance was so ugly that it made people want to vomit. It was a face as beautiful as jade. Even a world breaker like Thousand Heads was stunned by Wu Qi's face, and he almost threw up. Qian Shou gasped for air, but there was only the void around him. Even the rays of light from the chaos were blocked by his great divine ability. There was only a complete vacuum around him, a vacuum without a single speck of dust. He couldn't breathe at all. His body trembled violently, like a fish out of the water, but he could not even move. Talk nicely, or I can't guarantee what kind of treatment you will receive. Wu Qi looked at Thousand Heads coldly and said, when you are under a low wall, you have to learn to lower your head. Do you understand? If you don't understand, I promise you will.